introduce Bodie in a unique way today. I'm going to give you a real quick devotion and remind you of some incredible concepts about learning that we've already looked at in detail. And then we'll pray and turn it loose, turn Bodie loose with us. It is in a way, I'm going to talk fast and real succinct and precise as I can, and then you can refer to this a little bit later on. And it's a link with the teaching also you received from Martin. And both of them will do both of the things I'm talking about. So here we go. Ready? Got your attention? Sequence of thought. We all know, amen, that the beginning of wisdom and the beginning of knowledge is the fear of the Lord. You start with God. You believe Him, and then you are rewarded for that. Without faith, it's impossible to please Him. For those who come to God must believe that He is, and that He rewards those who diligently seek Him. Then we come to this idea of the human mind and how we perceive and contemplate truth and arrive at correct conclusions. And there we have these two big words, inductive and deductive. And these men have used and will use both of these avenues. Inductive reasoning, there's even a Bible that talks about inductive Bible study, doesn't it? And there's a famous woman teacher that uses this principle in her teaching. Inductive reasoning starts with specific observations to form a general conclusion. Deductive reasoning starts with a general premise and uses it to reach a specific conclusion. If I start with God, ancient men have to be intelligent. Okay, if I go to science, I can put all the deductive parts together and it will lead me to a conclusion. There has to be an intelligent God who did this. In the work of the scriptures and handling the scriptures, we can start with the Bible and then make incredible predictions. So Bodie this morning will, and he may want to add and develop this as he teaches. I don't want to steal a thunder, but I want to get our minds in a groove here. If we start with the Bible, and Martin did a lot of that already this week, the inductive or an exegetical view of Scripture. If we take the Bible and start putting it together and believing, we start believing it. It's amazing what we find, isn't it? And you say, how did that pastor, how does my pastor, where does he get that from? Okay, is he on his own intelligence figuring it out? Well, God may use that to draw him to his understanding and his education and his study and his reading and his commitment to prayer and motivated by meditation. But no, the Spirit of God is the one central in illuminating the text. And I believe he uses both of these to illuminate the text. So Bodie will look at the text this morning and then draw an incredible premise that since Genesis 10 and 11 are true, therefore we're going to find this to be true as we research history and archaeology. If we start with science, we're going to come to the same conclusions. Just want to point that out. Whether we look at the text and find the incredible truths there, or go to this world and link together understanding that God is the one who created and supersedes and is sovereign over mankind, we come to this incredible truth about God. That's what makes the teaching so exciting, to see what God has opened the eyes of others to, and as we come to Him. So let's pray. Father, thank you for this morning. You've asked Bodie to come to present the truth of the Tower of Babel. He's going to do some other sessions for us, which may seem like a bunny trail, but some of it, for example, will come from an understanding of ancient and early man and superstition and man's mind trying to find the truth and then make it true because they're pushing certain ideas. So I pray, Lord Jesus, you'll bless him. Thanks for letting him come and be with us, and his daughter Lacey too. And now we open our hearts and say, Lord Jesus, is there something you want me to see today and understand from your word? And we know that then we come with expectation, not on Bodie or on Martin, but expectation on you, Holy Spirit, and then use these men in our lives. Thank you again. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. I've known Bodie for quite some time, and he has done incredible work on research, admiring him on that, and it's just a joy to have him here, David, Bodie Hodge. So we got to get his first name right.
There's a David in here somewhere, right? All right, thank you. All right, let me make sure this mic's on, which is hidden in my pocket somewhere. There we go. Got a little sound on there? All right, good. My name is Bodie Hodge. You guys have probably figured that out. How many of you guys have seen anything that I've done or have read something that... So a number of you have. Some of you guys are like, who is this guy? I used to have hair. This is more of a recent development. I realize how cold it is without your hair on, especially in the mountains. But my background is actually mechanical engineering, material science. I got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in mechanical engineering. I was teaching at Southern Illinois University by the time I was 24 years old, all levels of undergraduate engineering. I was even teaching a master's level course there. While I was there, I did research for Lockheed Martin. I developed a new method of production of submicron titanium diboride. That was English, in case you guys are wondering. English is the official language of the United States, by the way. Did you guys hear about all that recently? But throughout my years, I've always had a love for theology. I've always had a love for history. And that's going to come through in here. You're going to see a lot of theology. You're going to see a lot of history. I'm talking today about the Tower of Babel. And, you know, when it comes to the Tower of Babel, there's a lot of history there. And I want you to understand, what is the true history book of the entire universe? The Bible. The Bible is the absolute authority in all areas, not just history. Every area, whether it's science, whether it's philosophy, whether it's the way you look at your neighbors or your friends. The Bible is that absolute authority in every single area. And it's nice being here at Jackson Hole Bible College because you guys are taught that. That's nice. It's actually easy for me to come in here and talk. There have been times I've spoken at churches where people aren't on board with the Bible, particularly Genesis. I've spoken at secular places, secular universities I've been at. I even went into a secular public school one time. I was invited to come in. And I've never been afraid to preach the gospel in those places. But sometimes those are difficult. So my goal here, I'm not here just to say, hey, let's get back to the Bible, guys. Yeah, I'm going to be saying that sort of thing. But I'm presuming that you guys have already got that foundation. And so I want to help take you deeper into a whole new level. When it comes to the Tower of Babel, do you realize it comes under attack just like everything else in Genesis in today's culture? You guys may have seen it firsthand. I see it all the time. In fact, when I was on the plane flying here, a guy sitting next to me made a comment about millions of years. I was like, oh boy, it's right before we hopped off the plane. But the thing is, Genesis comes under attack. When I hear millions of years, that's an attack on Genesis because it is particularly an attack on the flood of Noah's day because it's a battle over those rock layers. And you guys get the opportunity to see a lot of that out here. Genesis chapter 10 and 11 comes under attack as well. Genesis 1 to 11 is under severe attack. For example, if you were to write a paper on the Tower of Babel, let's say you're out in the secular world, let's say you're a high school student or an 8th grader. My daughter's back here. And you're going to write a paper on the Tower of Babel. Let's say you're in a secular school. You hop on the one place everybody goes for their research, Google, right? They type in Tower of Babel, first couple of links here, Wikipedia, you know, the encyclopedia that changes every day that really doesn't like God so much. Okay, starts off, it calls it a origin myth right there. And then you see Encyclopedia Britannica, mythological tower in Babylonia. Right off the bat, it's coming under attack the moment somebody types something into the internet. So yeah, it's coming under attack. The Bible's coming under attack, no doubt about it. But see, most kids out there have been taught that secular worldview, that there was nothing. And then there was something. That's called the Big Bang. I want you to understand what that philosophy is. They say there was nothing. Time, no space. Time didn't even exist in their worldview. Something pops into existence from nothing and rapidly explodes or expands. They claim this happened anywhere from about 13 to 15 billion years ago. They say you got hydrogen, helium, and lithium, and then somehow all that stuff comes together and you get gravitational forces and all sorts of laws of nature, and it forms all this stuff, and finally you get some stars, and then you finally get solid planets after the stars blow up, and it's a wild and crazy story, but the way they put it, you finally get the Earth and you finally get some oceans, and then through random processes, chemicals come together and form the first life, and it evolves further and further and further. We get some sort of monkey-like creature that evolves into some sort of ape-like creature, and then into humans. And kids are drilled with this. I was drilled with this. I want you to understand, I went to secular schools. I was in a state school for grade school and high school and went to a secular university. I was drilled with it. I still have my textbooks from grade school. Beautiful picture of a frog in one of them. Says me and that frog are no different. That's the kind of stuff I was taught. I really was. But this is the worldview most people have been taught. But when we start with the Bible, that's not what you get. You see, it's not even close. And yet the world is teaching this as though it is some sort of absolute and utter fact. So do we have an uphill battle? Yeah, we do as Christians. We have to battle and get back to the authority of the Word of God. But you know, Charles Darwin did some teaching. He wrote two books. Everybody's saying, you know, everybody's familiar with his first book. Remember, you guys know the title? Yeah, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection for the Preservation of Favored Races. Wow, it's a racist book just by its title. And if you don't think it's racist, wait till you get to his second book, The Descent of Man, for the sexual selection. I can't even remember. But in his second book, he's arguing that man evolved out of Africa because that's where the apes were. So back in the 1800s, this was in 1871 when he published that book, ancient history that's been recorded in books from cultures all over the world were thrown out. And they threw it out and they replaced it with this story that Charles Darwin threw out there. Said we evolved out of Africa from ape-like creatures because that's where the apes were. Here's his book, quote from it. It is therefore probable that Africa was formerly inhabited by extinct apes closely allied to the gorilla and chimpanzee. And as these two species are now man's nearest allies, it is somewhat more probable that our early progenitors lived on the African continent than elsewhere. I don't know if you realize how powerful this quote was in academia. Do you realize ancient history from Armenians, from Egyptians, from Greeks, from Romans, from Germans, and all sorts of ancient cultures were all thrown out and replaced with this? And I went through massive amounts of education being taught this worldview, and I was never told about all these different cultures that recorded their own history. People are smart. Back in the past, they recorded their history over and over again. So where did all these people come from then, if they didn't evolve out of Africa? If we start with the Bible, where did people come from? Tower of Babel. I mean, if you go all the way back, you know, get Adam and Eve, we came from dust and a rib and stuff like that. You know, did Adam have a belly button? Oh. No, you know, I always wanted to see a little cartoon. You know, Adam has like a little dust button. Eve has like a little rib button. What are our kids going to have? Belly buttons? Where did everyone come from? So what I did with the Tower of Babel, I wanted to go back to the Bible. And I wanted to look at people groups. And I want to use the Bible as the absolute authority. And then secondarily, I want to use all this ancient literature that people have had that have recorded their own histories. Because it's out there. And, you know, of course, I want to start with the Bible because there's no greater authority than God. Do you realize in Hebrews 6:13, when God made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself. There's no greater authority than God on anything. So what I want to do is I want to look at people groups and nations and tribes in light of what the Bible says. So yeah, you have Adam and Eve. They have other sons and daughters in Genesis 5:4. You have the bottleneck at the flood. Noah and his family survived. They come off the ark. The Lord says, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. Instead, they came together and built a city and tower, so let's not be scattered. Of course, the Lord scattered them, and they go all over the world. That's the framework, the big picture framework that I want to look at when I'm looking at different people groups. So you jump back to Genesis chapter 10, and in Genesis chapter 10, I'm graphic. I like to see things graphically. Have you guys ever been in those Bible studies and you're reading and you're going around in a circle and you look ahead like, well, which one am I going to get? And it's like that chapter with all the genealogies. You're like, oh, Lord, please don't let that one be me. You have to read all those names. And yeah, well, believe it or not, I think I can pronounce most of these names now because I've been into them so many times. But we all do this. But I wanted to show this graphically. You have Noah, you have his three sons, Japheth, Shem, and Ham. Shem is often listed first because of his prominence. That's the line going through Abraham all the way down to Christ. Japheth has several sons listed at the Tower of Babel. The ones in yellow here are the immediate sons of those three. So they're Noah's grandsons. Then you see great-grandsons, then great-great-grandsons, and so forth. And there's some that are missing. You know, there's other sons and daughters in some of those, particularly in Shem's lineage. They're not giving us everything complete. In some cases, you're not given the name of the person, but you're given the name of those people, like the Jebusites, for example. Those are the people who lived at Jerusalem, for example. That's where Jerusalem came from. So all these names on here, I want you to just step back for a moment and realize your direct ancestors are on the board right now. My direct ancestors are too. We are all related. We're all cousins. This is one big family reunion, which means somewhere you guys have bald genes floating around somewhere. I don't know where, but Genesis 11, verse 4. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Now, what led up to this? Of course, God gave them command for them to go and be fruitful and fill the earth. And they wanted to defy that. So Noah has a farm. All these different things are happening. There's the incident with Ham and Canaan gets cursed and so forth. Well, now they're leaving. They're like, okay, what do we do? Let's not be scattered. They wanted to defy God. They knew what God's command was. They tried to defy it. So where was this at? Well, it's in the Middle East. And it is at a place that we can now call Babel. So the possible location is right here. We used to say possible location, but there's been a lot of archaeology that's been done in the past 125 years or so that, boy, we know for sure this is the site for Babel. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot of foundation stones. I don't know if you guys are familiar with foundation stones. When people build stuff, sometimes they'll put the date. You're like, 1984, this building was built. You know, they actually put it in the stone. People have done that for all the way back into ancient times, and they'll have the name. And so we have the names of it going way back. So this is there. And then people go all over the place as a result of that. So when was the Tower of Babel? Big picture, after the flood, but before the call of Abraham. So let's be a little bit more specific. Archbishop James Ussher says, hey, this was around 2242 BC. That's the date he has his big Annals of the World. And that date's probably off a little bit. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us the exact date that the scattering occurred. What we're told is it is in the days of Peleg. So what exactly does that mean? A lot of times when people said in the days of Saul or in the days of David and so forth. Now, all the days of Peleg are actually within the days of Noah. Noah actually outlived Peleg. So what all does that mean? What it means is there's a range in there. The earliest it could be is 101 years after the flood. Archbishop Ussher here puts it 106 years after the flood. And the reason he does that, there's an ancient historian named Manetho. He's a Greek historian. Now, he was off on a number of things, but one of the things that he said was the scattering occurred 5 years after the birth of Peleg. So Peleg was born 101 years after the flood. So he tacks on 5 more years. That's where he gets 106 years later at 2242 BC. So the minimum would be 101, probably up to 130 years or so. There's probably a range in there. So even though Archbishop Ussher puts that number there, it's probably off just a little bit. And there's reasons for that. I'm not going to go into that in all the detail. But let's look at some of the archaeology in particular of the Tower of Babel. The name tower in Hebrew literally is the Hebrew word migdal. It means tower, of course, but it also figuratively means a pyramidal bed of flowers. Think of like a pyramid shape, and they've got all these flowers kind of growing on it, which is kind of unique. The tower itself was ziggurat in shape. You guys are probably fairly familiar with that. Here's kind of an aerial view looking down at it. And you can see the long stairway that would have went up and all that. But you can see it's not there anymore. And that's actually a pool of water. And there's some history to all this. Here's another view of it. And Clifford Wilson, he was a world-renowned archaeologist. He and I actually co-published together in the Answers Book Volume 1. We had him write a chapter for us on archaeology before he died. He's a brilliant guy, actually. We said this large pool at modern Babylon is over the ruins of an early structure that was possibly the original Tower of Babel. So we actually have the site. It's called the Etemenanke site. You guys are impressed I can say that, aren't you? In the native language, it basically means the tower from heaven to earth, which reflects that actual language that we see in Genesis chapter 11. Here's an ancient historian named Herodotus. He was also Greek, and he's writing about the 5th century BC. Now, it still existed in his day. Look what he says about it. It was still in existence in my time. It had a solid central tower, 1 stadium square, with a second erected on top of it, and then a third, and so on, up to 8. All 8 towers can be climbed by a spiral running around the outside, and about halfway up, there are some seats for those who make the ascent to rest on. Okay. Older fellow like that probably appreciated those seats if he went up this. So there's some of this. Now, I want you to understand, though, this is 5th century. This is a long time after the Tower of Babel. What happens to ancient structures when they sit for a while or get dealt with for a long time? They deteriorate. They have problems. And if you actually look at the history of the Tower of Babel, it's actually went through a number of iterations and repairs and rebuilds and so forth. For example, well before this, actually before Nebuchadnezzar was there, remember the Babylonian Empire? So the Babylonian Empire, Tower of Babel was well before that. So you have 700 BC over here. Here you go over about 2000 BC. So it's significantly different in time frame. Well, in between there was a guy named Sennacherib. Sennacherib came in and absolutely wiped out Babylon. The city of Babylon rebelled against him. He was so mad at him for it. He went in there. He had everything obliterated. And upstream, they diverted the river to raise the water level to actually flood it so that they couldn't rebuild it. Well, his son actually liked Babylon, so he had it rebuilt as much as he could to its former measure. When they rebuilt the tower, though, although the base was the same, by the time you had it built, I think they did it quick, because Nebuchadnezzar, just a couple of generations later, was like, boy, this thing's in massive disrepair. We got to fix it up again. So, there's a lot of history going on in there. But just to give you an idea, kind of what it would have looked like, this is that long stairway going up toward the front. And you can see multiple levels on here. Now, different times in history, you had different number of levels. In Herodotus' day, they had 8 levels. So some things had even switched from some of the early times. There's actually a Tower of Babel stele or stele. People pronounce it both ways, actually, apparently. But it's basically a rock. It's not made out of steel, but it's engraving. It's got Nebuchadnezzar, and you can kind of see this tower going up. You can kind of see a step pyramid on it. And there's an inscription. And so here's kind of what it looks like in a little bit more detail, if you can see that. And then you can read it if you want. God, I'm telling you, Tower of Babel just messed everything up when all the languages switched, didn't it? It really does. But so it's talking about him actually here. Now look at the number of levels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. See, things have changed even from Nebuchadnezzar's day going down to Herodotus' day. So there are even differences. Now what's interesting is this structure on the very top. That's the building right next to it. That's the Isengila. And that was a different temple that was actually right next to it, and it gives you the layout of it. And they even have the dimensions on this. This is about 91 meters. If you guys know meters, I mean, it's somewhere around 300 feet, just to give you an idea. So a little bit more about the archaeology at the Tower of Babel. Here's this Etmananke site. So this is looking down like from Google, coming down on it. Satellite image, that is. So you're looking down at it. You got the Euphrates River here, and you have all this different stuff from ancient archaeological Babel here. So there's even the Southern Palace and so forth. The East End Gill would have been, I can't remember if it was on this side or this side, but there's actually a bit of a footprint on that. So here's what's happened with all of this stuff. See, here's this. And yeah, here's the East End Gilla. That was that other temple. So a lot of stuff has been done. But a lot of people haven't known about it until recently. How many of you guys speak German? Sprechen Sie Deutsch? Lacey knows 1, 2, 3 because, you get in trouble after 3, and we'd say it in German, so they knew we were serious. But I know enough German to be dangerous in a German restaurant, or a French restaurant, or a Chinese restaurant. But yet the Lord kept sending me to Spanish-speaking places. I don't get it. But at any rate. So what's happened, the last 125 years or so, since 1899, the Germans have been the ones, and their archaeologists have been the one digging up Babel. So they've been going through this thing like crazy, and they publish all this stuff in the technical journals in German. So all of us English speakers are like, what's going on? Well, Professor George, he's a university professor at the University of London recently, decided, hey, let's go through all this German archaeological stuff and let's inform the English-speaking world. So he wrote this gigantic technical paper, which was brilliant, actually. And he starts off by saying that he doesn't agree with the Tower of Babel story in the Bible. So he's considered a hostile witness in one sense. He doesn't believe what the Bible says about it. So to me, that makes it even more powerful when they're going through all this archaeology. But at any rate, he goes through all this stuff, outlining what all these different German archaeologists have done over the years, and he's basically bringing it over into English. But there was one thing that really caught me out of all the stuff they've done. They've found tons of foundational stones, a whole bunch of cuneiform, and he's an expert on the cuneiform as well. But it was this. In his paper, he's like, careful survey and measurements of the ruined infrastructure let Schmidt, that's one of the archaeologists who was looking particularly at the Tower of Babel structure, to identify the remains of 3 successive buildings, not 2. The oldest structure was a tower of mud brick measuring about 65 meters square at its base, which had suffered heavy damage. Superimposed on this core was a mantle of more mud brick anchored into the older structure with timber beams and measuring about 73 meters square at its base. The brickwork of this mantle and the older core had later been cut back below the ground to about 60 meters square. The residual shelf of compressed mud, the so-called, okay, I'm not German, I'm just going to throw that one out. Tonbeton, I don't even know what that is. Okay. Then served as a partial platform for the more durable mantle of baked brick measuring about 91 meters square at its base. Okay, let me put this into plain old English, right? There's 3 bases that have been found at the Tower of Babel site, at the actual tower site. The highest one is the 91 meter square base. Below that, you have a 73 meter base. Below that, you have a 65 meter base. And they'll kind of use those to kind of build on top of it to go up. See, what's made it tough for all these archaeologists is every time they dig down, the water level's higher because of Sennacherib, so they're having to deal with water every time. But they've been able to get these 3 different platforms and get measurements and do a lot of study on those. So think about this. Which one's the oldest? The 65 meter, the lowest one, right? How big do you think the Tower of Babel base was? Probably 65 meter. Just to give you an idea how that translates over, it's be 213 feet. One way, 213 by 213, all the way around as a square. That's amazing when you think about this. I got excited about that because I'm like, the Germans have known about this for years, and none of us over here in English even had a clue. And yet English and German are surprisingly similar. So, well, I'll give you a little history because the Tower of Babel doesn't exist anymore. So Herodotus in his day, it was still there. He was able to climb up it, and it's not there anymore. What happened was about 330 BC, Alexander the Great ordered the tower to be destroyed in an effort to rebuild it. What happened to Alexander the Great? Does anybody remember what happened to him? He died in Babylon at a very young age. So he gave the order to have it torn down because he wanted to rebuild it. Again, it was in rough shape. So they tear it down and he died. So now all of a sudden, the Greek Empire split apart. There's nobody there to rebuild it. And so it's left in ruins. And so we have the ruins up to this day. And it's the 91 meter base, so 300 feet, if you see that. So now as people spread all over the world, guess what they do? They take their building project with them. Sinners. You know, I've seen a number of different towers and mounds. Where I grew up in Western Illinois. There's a number of mounds. If you go down to Cahokia, that's one of the most famous ones, but we weren't too far from Dixon Mounds. And it's just fascinating when you see some of these. There's different mounds I saw out near Stonehenge, which kind of surprised me. I didn't know that. You know, I'm very familiar with Stonehenge, and I go out to Stonehenge, speaking in England, and we're out there and we're sitting there admiring Stonehenge. It's not big actually, but then I turn around, I look off in the distance, you see all these huge earthen mounds, and I'm like, well, now that's exciting too, and everybody else is like, ooh, look at the stones there at Stonehenge, and a funny thing that happened to me while I was at Stonehenge, right? My phone starts ringing, and I'm like, it's my wife. Hello? What are you doing? Well, I'm at Stonehenge right now. I mean, hey, how cool of a conversation is that? I mean, that's like, yeah, I'm at the Great Pyramid. It's just really kind of cool. But we see ancient structures, whether it's Stonehenge, whether it's these towers, whether it's mounds, all sorts of ancient tipples and timekeeping devices shows the brilliance of ancient man. Don's done a couple books on that, and a lot of the team here at Jackson Hole have done a lot of that as well. And it's exciting to see all that. Well, what about the languages? There's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 6,900 spoken languages in the world, about 7,000 of them. Did they all come out of the Tower of Babel? Yes and no. Let me explain this. So when we look at these different languages, we have to understand how languages are grouped together into families because languages change over time. Let me explain this to you because my wife is from Australia. Although she sounds like she's partially from San Diego, Northern Kentucky, and South Carolina, the 3 places she primarily lived. But I've been to Australia and they have a language that's different. In fact, you guys are familiar with Ken Ham, right? So Ken has a brother named David who still lives down in Australia. He came up here one time, and we had this car that had a couple of tires that got blown out on it. So we go to one of those places out in the middle of nowhere, pull your own parts, those junkyard kind of places, right? So there's a fella down there with an accent from the hills of Kentucky, right? So hills of Kentucky, Australia, and they're trying to communicate. And it was hilarious because one of them would say something, the other would go, huh? Then they would say something, huh? So I jumped in and I started to translate. I'm translating English to English, but in ways that they can understand each other. And I thought, oh boy, English is messed up. I've been all over the United States. I've been up to Canada. Take off, eh? You hoser. I mean, that's a whole different language. Need I mention Tennessee? Okay. So I found out something. When I went to England, there's a lot of accents in English. We think, oh, there's a British accent. There's an English accent. No, there's a whole bunch of them. And they're very different from each other. Yes, we're going over to Birmingham. We're going to speak in a particular way in Birmingham. You go to other places, it's not even close to that. I didn't realize I was in Birmingham in the Black Country. There's a road that kind of separates the two. And I made the mistake of saying, hey, it's great to be in Birmingham. And I mean, like the hands went up like, you're not in Birmingham. That is across the street. I'm like, oh boy, it's not just the language. They don't even get along with each other across the street. I'm telling you, sin has affected the world. But I want you to notice there's a lot of variations in English, but it's deeper than that. When you look at these different people coming out of the Tower of Babel, that's, according to Genesis chapter 10, they came out with new languages by their family groups. But those languages continue to change down through the years. So if you tally up how many people, different families came out of the Tower of Babel, there were at least 78 language families that came out of the Tower of Babel. I say at least because if you tally all those up, there's some other sons and daughters in there. So there's a little bit of variation. So that's kind of a minimum number. And as these different families go out and their children move off and go off to different places, well, you have new names for new mountains and new names for new trees and things like that. So you add certain words, you lose certain words, you forget certain words. Sometimes you combine with another family group, or sometimes you're taken as slaves, or sometimes your groups just intermix together. So languages get convoluted and messed up. So just look at English if you go back into the past. I mean, we're looking at English today. Let's go back in the past now. Here. Our Father who art in heaven. Father which art in heaven? Our Father that... Okay, that looks like German just 1,000 years ago. Okay. Now get ready to have your minds blown. English is considered a Germanic language. And yet we can't read the German coming from the archaeologists, right? That's how different it's changed just in 1,000 years. But yeah, English is considered a Germanic language, but we have a lot of a Latin base because the French Normans, which had a French and Latin root, came in and the language mixed. But you look at a whole bunch of words, they're German or they're French, or sometimes we borrow from others. So English is kind of a messed up language. There's people around the world, when they come try to learn English, they're like, it's so messed up. That's right, because it's actually two different languages that combine together, but it's still considered German in its style. So it's really changed. That means the English and German and these other Germanic language families like Austrian or Norwegian and so forth, Dutch, these are all part of the Germanic language family. So when you start tallying together those language families, that number of 6,900 or 7,000 languages goes down significantly. Think of the Romance language family. Not that it's sweet and cute, it's languages of Rome, okay? So Latin, you have Romanian, you have Italian, you have Spanish, Portuguese, French. They're all considered Romance languages. You bring those language families down, the language experts say there's somewhere around 95 to 100 of these ancient types of language families. Now, of course, today we have a lot of different language families. Do you realize that some computer languages like C or BASIC or Fortran, they're actually considered languages as well? There's sign languages. These are newer languages. There's constructed languages like Esperanto. I actually have a code that I can write with one of my daughters. It would be considered a language. We're not counting those for these legitimate types of language. Apparently Klingon is a language. Do you realize people can, amazing. Shows the brilliance of being made in the image of God, really. But, minimum 78, maximum about 95 to 100. We're right in the ballpark. That's amazing. Compare this to the secular world. Remember Darwin's worldview? We all evolved out of Africa from some dumb brutes and apes and so forth. Ape-like creatures, that is. There should be like a single, some sort of grunting ape-like language that we all came from. No. All these languages that we have around the world, massively unique, intricate, incredible grammar, all sorts of different things that are just totally unique from anything like that. All right. At this part, I do like accents. The toughest interview I ever did was with a Scottish group. Oh, man. Some of the words they used. Do you guys know what a diplodocus is? I was being interviewed about a diplodocus. I didn't know what a diplodocus was. Most of the rest of us call it a diplodocus. It's a dinosaur. I was like, what's a diplodocus? Turn the camera off. But no, I love accents. I love different people groups. In fact, I've written an entire book on the Tower of Babel. And what I did in that book and in my older lecture is I went back and I went to Genesis chapter 10. I put all those names up there and I said, what people groups came out of those different groups? Like all these people groups came out of Ashkenaz. All these different people groups came out of Tarshish. But people don't ask me those questions. They don't say, hey, Bodie, who are the descendants of Javan? I don't have people ask me that question. You know, the way people come to me and say, where'd the Irish and Scots come from? Where'd the Chinese come from? Where'd the Egyptians come from? Where'd the Greeks come from? That's how people ask the question. So what I want to do in this talk is I want to flip that around then. I'm going to answer it based on the way people are asking the question. So where do the Irish and the Scots come from? And I put those two together for a reason. You guys know where Ireland is in Scotland, right? Okay. So, you know, there's Idaho over here. I flew into Idaho. They grow a lot of potatoes. Ireland grows a lot of potatoes. No connection though, really. Scotland, Ireland. If you go back to their ancient history, you know, how did they get there? Yeah, they could have went by boat. Yeah, they could have went by land to get out to Ireland. And, you know, if we just think about this, you know, the water route, obviously Noah and his sons were master shipbuilders. They were the coastline people in Genesis chapter 10. People could go by boat all over the place. We got to remember that. People were not dumb brutes back then. They really were brilliant. But what about the land route? All right, let's think about this. We look here and we think, okay, you got Scotland, you got Ireland out here. How did people get out there to the British Isles? They'd had to take a boat, right? Not necessarily. The flood triggered what? Does anybody remember what the flood triggered? An ice age, right. At an ice age, you take a lot of water out of the ocean and you put it on land. So the ocean level drops. When it drops, it exposes all sorts of land bridges. I mean, if you look at this, you can almost go all the way out to places like Cuba, all around the British Isles. You can walk out to Japan, potentially down here to Australia in some of these places. So when we think in terms of the history between the flood, Tower of Babel, and the Ice Age going on, it's possible people could have walked right out there. It really is. Some of the animals could have got there that way. That area out there is actually called Dodgerland or Doggerland. I've heard people pronounce it both ways. I don't know what the official pronunciation is. I've typically called it Dodgerland going back into the past. But yeah, you can see a lot of that's very shallow out there. They've actually dredged nets and people pulled up artifacts out of what we call the North Sea right up here, the old German Sea, the Dodgerland, which you see there. But at the peak of the Ice Age, the maximum that everybody, whether creationists or evolutionists say, the maximum would have dropped about 350 feet. Now, in the secular world, they have a whole bunch of ice ages going back for millions of years. We have one major ice age triggered by the flood. There's been a little ice age and some fluctuations back and forth. But by and large, it is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 350 feet from that peak ice age that we had. So yeah, they could have went out there. Now, ocean levels continue to change. They've changed throughout history. And it's interesting, when you look at some ancient history, there are certain places where there were some little islands and so forth that just existed or didn't exist at certain times. Here's a map from 1730. Now, what I liked about looking at some of this, if you look carefully at some little areas on this particular map, there are areas where there's little islands and there's not little islands in certain places. But notice what they had here. The Dodger Bay. That was an area that the ships had to avoid because it was so shallow right there that they could run aground in the mud. We don't even worry about that sort of stuff today. But that shows you the ocean level is a little lower. I've got some other maps where there's sometimes little islands sticking off out here that aren't there right now. because the ocean level rises and lowers. And yet we're in a culture today that's all on about global warming and climate change, right? They see any little shift in any of that, oh, we're to blame, we're doing, it's been shifting back and forth for a long time. So we need to understand this and be careful of the sensational claims then as a result of that. Okay, well, let's get back to the Scots and the Irish. This is from Geoffrey Keating, ancient historian. He wrote this actually back in 1723, but he's looking at the ancient history of Ireland in particular. He says in here, the posterity of Japheth, it's obviously Japheth in Scripture, inhabited most of the northern countries of Asia and all Europe. Magog, one of the sons of Japheth, was the great ancestor of the Scythians and several families that invaded the kingdom of Ireland after the flood. Before the Milesians, these are a group of people in Spain, made a conquest of the island. And this will appear more fully in the body of this history. So he goes on to talk about these different invasions and people going in there. But that's interesting. He says that their greatest ancestor was Magog. Oh, okay. So you have Noah, Japheth, Magog, and then as they go through the lineage in that book, it goes down to a man named Bath, Phinehas, Pharsa. You go all the way down here, Newell married a Scotta, which was the daughter of Pharaoh, actually. You go all the way down here, and then even the Milesians came out of Magog as well. Those ones that were a group in Spain at the time. If you look at the Scots have an ancient lineage. Noah, Japheth, Magog, Bath, Pharsi. See, it actually shares some of the similar lineage. You go all the way down here, but the name Scott actually came from a line on down here just a little bit farther. He was a king of Scythia that moved up into that area. So there's a relationship between this. These ancient lineages that these guys have in their own histories have all been ignored because of Darwin. See how a secular worldview has caused people to not understand ancient history of their own nations? How many people in Scotland and Ireland actually understand their own history? They bought into the Darwinistic view as well. There's actually 3 ancient lineages, if I remember right, for Ireland that go back to Magog that are all from 3 different sources. So I thought that was kind of neat too. Where did the Spanish come from? I kind of mentioned one of the groups that were in Spain. Spain actually has a number of different groups that were in there. One of the most popular groups actually came through Japheth as well, through Tubal. Now, some of the variant names for Tubal, according to ancient cultures, were Jubal. You can see kind of a variation in the name, Tubal and Jubal. Pluto, Jobel, Atlas he was called, Atlas Mauritanius specifically. He was also called Dis. He was also called Ibeers. The Greeks called him Ibeers. That was the name of Tubal for Ibeers. Well, do you guys know what the name of the peninsula is that Spain's on? The Iberian Peninsula. You see the reflection of that name is right there. And what's interesting is Spain has been called the land of Tubal for thousands of years. So you still see a reflection of those names that are in there. And it just passes right down through here. So as you look at it, obviously they could come by land or they could come by boat here. You see Iberia here. Well, some of Tubal's descendants also went up in here. And some of them went all the way up into an area of Russia, near Tobolsk, Russia. You can still see a reflection of his name, Tobolsk. There's the Tubal River up there, Tubil, and it dropped the S on Siberia. Iberia, Siberia. See the name? It sees a reflection of those names. Caucasian Iberia is down in here. City called Tbilisi, Tabal. So yeah, there's a relationship between some of these names from their own ancient histories. So Spain, yeah, you've got certain different people that are showing up in there. So here you have Noah, Shem. This is through a line of Shem. A group actually ended up out there, according to James Anderson, looking at the ancient royal genealogies back in the 1700s as well. So the one that I pointed out before, some of the group, the Milesian group, they actually were in Spain as well. So there's several different groups. The Castilian people, the primary group in there, they were the ones that were descendants of Tubal. Another group that made it there were descendants of Javan called Tarshish. So there's 2 Tarshishes. Both of them are in the Mediterranean Sea. One of them is actually very close, not too far from Israel. The other is all the way over in Spain. Which one do you think Jonah was trying to get to? Let's get to the one as far away as we can get. So it was probably that particular Tarshish. And this also comes from James Anderson. So yeah, these are all the different groups that I found that have arrived into Spain. So you have Tubal, you have Aram, you have Magog. Some of the Libyans and Egyptians showed up there later on. The Greeks were there. The Phoenicians were as well, which came out of Canaan. And then later on, you have Goths, Romans, and then the Moors. You know, if you think of when Spain and Portugal were conquered by the African Moors for about 400 or 500 years. So there's a lot of groups that have made it into Spain. There's a lot of different ones. Where do the Germans, English, and Scandinavians come from? Wow, the dumb luck that those were all asked together. It's as if I knew what the answer was. But a lot of people, you know, have English descent in the United States. German is the #1 ancestor for people in the United States, which surprises a lot of people, Scandinavians. But they're all kind of up there together. And you look at the ancient lineages. What I loved about James Anderson, let me explain James Anderson. I've referred to him a few times here. He was back in the 1700s, and by order of one of the princes of Great Britain, he was required to look at all these different royal genealogies and their ancient histories all over the world. Now, if you understand the 1700s, Britain controlled much of the world. So not only did they control much of the world, they also had trade all over the world. They had access to a lot of these records. So one of the royals said, put together a book on royal genealogies. So he wrote this book, and it is printed in incredible fine print. Okay. Do you guys like reading books with big print or little print? Yeah, the little print drives you nuts. And it is 800 pages. It's not small. And I read that book. It was one of the most boring reads I've ever read in my entire life. But every once in a while, I get to a page and get this incredible nugget of information. You're like, oh, I'm so excited. I tell my wife, and she'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So there's a lot of these little nuggets that came out of this, because there are some cultures that have royal genealogies that go right back to Noah. The Germans are one of them. It's amazing. They actually have a lineage from Noah going all the way down to about the same time as King Saul. And then Germany broke into 3 nations, 3 kingdoms. And then right after that, it broke into a whole bunch of petty kingdoms for about 1,000 years. But I mean, those ancient lineages, they all agree on it. All these different houses in Europe, they all agree on it, looking at those lineages. But they go through Noah, Japheth, Gomer, and then Ashkenaz. That's a great-grandson of Noah listed at the Tower of Babel. In fact, the ancient name for Germany is Ashkenaz. A lot of the Jews that fled from Rome in AD 70, remember when the Jews were absolutely obliterated by the Romans? They destroyed the temple and destroyed Jerusalem. People fled. One of the places they fled was Germany because the Romans hadn't conquered them there. So they go up there. The Jews that live up in that area have been known as the Ashkenazi Jews, Jews living in the land of Ashkenaz. They still use that name even in today's day and age. So they, if you look at their ancient history, some of them settled right up in here, some right in here, but most of them settled right up in here. And then Ashkenaz moved up to Central Europe with 20 of his sons. One of them was Danius, which is where the Danes came from. One of them was Sarmatia, which is where the Sarmatians came from. So they have these ancient histories. And of course, the English, the Angles, and the Saxons came out of the German tribes, and they came over into England, Norway, Denmark, Sweden. A lot of the Vikings obviously came out of Ashkenaz here as well. So some of the names, the name Asaxon is actually a variation of the name Ashkenaz. Scandinavia or Scandia, Asken Sea. The old name for the Black Sea was the Asken Sea because he actually lived up in there. So, I mean, you see a lot of relations with some of these different names and so forth in that particular area. Ashkenaz, you know, when you come out of the Tower of Babel, you have multitudes of names. One of his names was Tuisco. He was called Mercury as well by Rome, and Thoth and Hermes by the Greeks. Now I want you to understand, now we've seen a couple of these guys whose names appear to be Roman gods or Greek gods, right? Well, yeah, these guys have been elevated to a godlike status, but they're just real people. It's sad that people have elevated them to a godlike status, but that's exactly what they've done. Mercury or Hermes in this instance. The German ancient god is the Tuisco name. That's one of them. So, you know, I look at these and I go, hold on a second here. They're elevating people to a godlike status. So let's take a look at that for just a moment. It's a form of ancestor worship. It is paganism. And you realize paganism dominated all over the world. You have Roman paganism, you have Greek paganism, Egyptian. Shinto of Japan is just a form of ancestor worship. It's paganism as well. The Germans are known for it, the Norse, and so forth. So why do you think they were elevating some of these people to a godlike status? Let's step back and think about it. Okay, Adam lived 930 years. Okay? And of course, he has Seth and so forth. But if you look down through here, all these people are living like 900 years old or so, except Enoch. He's still alive. He hasn't died yet. That's amazing when you think about it. His son, Methuselah, lived 969 years old before he died. So we oftentimes say, yeah, he was the longest lived person in the Bible, yet his dad outlived him. Thinking about that one. But yeah, you get down here. Now, after the flood, we start to see this shift. Actually, Noah's father, Lamech, only lived 777. He was 200 years less than his father. So it's already started. There's something declining there genetically. Shem lived 600 years. Arphaxad, Selah, Eber, Peleg, and so forth. So if you think about this, Ashkenaz, Tubal, some of these guys are right around the same level of Arphaxad. So they're still living a long time, right? So they're going to outlive some of their great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. Do you think people look at them different? I mean, if you guys had a great-great-great-great-great-grandfather that still looks like they're 47, and yet your own dad and your grandpa have aged and are dying, you start looking at them different. Like, are you guys ever going to die? You guys are like immortals. And it's funny, you look back at the ancient Greek myths, the immortals or the gods in their view, they still died. They just outlived everyone else. It's like, oh, okay, now we see what's going on. It's because of the great ages as they're declining. So yeah, the Greek ancestors, that's how they were looking at them. They just started thinking, are you guys ever going to die? You're like immortals or so forth. So Shem, he actually outlived his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson Terah. Terah's the father of Abraham. Just gives you an idea. Shem and Abraham were right there. Shem was pretty old at the time, but that just gives you an idea. Now, we know Shem's age. How old did Japheth live? How old did Ham live? We don't know. Japheth might have lived 900 years old still. Ham could have. Shem might have been the young one that died early. We don't know. They could have died about the same age as Shem. We oftentimes assume that, but we simply don't know that. But yeah, all these different religions, these different mythologies, these different ones that have ancestor worship, that's probably one of the main reasons that it exploded early after the flood. Okay, well, what about those decreases in ages? Now, let's think about this for a second. I've had people say, well, maybe it was diet change. After the flood, man was first permitted to eat meat, Genesis 9:3. So yeah, you can have a hot dog. Do you want to have a hot dog? Do you guys know what's in a hot dog? Has some of everything. But the thing is, there have been people who've largely been vegetarian their whole life. They don't live 900 years old, you see. So it's probably not anything like that. Increased oxygen. Some people thought maybe the world before the flood had different partial pressures of oxygen compared to what we have after the flood. The fact is, it probably was a little bit different. And there are some medical benefits to increase oxygen in certain instances. However, most of the time when you increase oxygen, you get increased free radicals, and you need antioxidants, and it causes more problems than it's worth. That actually is more of a detriment. So a lot of people lean against that. Were there other environmental changes? It's possible. Anatomical changes? It's possible. But the thing that most people look at, they think there might have been genetic bottlenecks, particularly at the flood and at the Tower of Babel, that changed things. If you marry close relations, you can run into problems. Now, after the flood, everybody's a close relation. Grandkids, great-grandkids are all intermarrying with each other. Same sort of thing happened at the Tower of Babel. You take a whole family group and you move them over here, boom, they're intermarrying again with close families. So there could be issues there. If you look after Shem here, you have 3 generations where they're living, about 445 years on average. Immediately after the Tower of Babel, you get 3 generations where they, boom, suddenly jump down to about 236 years on average. So there's a significant decline as a result of flood and as a result of the Tower of Babel. But there could be other factors, because like I said, Shem was actually born before the flood. He only lived 600 years old. So there's that factor as well. So there's a lot of things going on. If you look down Japheth's line, one of the historical records that we have is that Togarmah lived about 600 years old. And yet Togarmah was a great-grandson, if I remember right. And yet he lived about the same age as Shem, who was a son. So, maybe some of the other lines weren't declining as fast as some of the others were. We simply don't know. Imagine trying to find a job in those days. 125 years experience required. Oh, I only have 96 years. I'm still not qualified. All right, what about the French, Portuguese, and the Celts? All right, let's take a look at these guys. Okay, you look at some of the ancient history of Gaul and these different areas. Gaul is the ancient name for France, by the way. Gaul is actually a variation of the name Gomer. It's one of Noah's grandsons. Gomer is not to be confused with golly, Shazam. Some of you people have no idea what I just did right there. You're looking at me like, what? If you don't know, ask somebody who's laughing. Oh, the old Gomer Pyle days, yeah. But different Gomer. But yeah, he had descendants. So you have Gaul or Gallia, Galatia. Paul wrote to the Galatians here. So what happened, there was a war. Some of these Galatians were fighting a war down here. And they were getting really close down here. And people didn't like that. And they're like, hey, the Greeks who were really powerful, like, you got to stop the Galatians. And well, they didn't want to. They're like, we're not worried about that. And then they came down here. And they started to hit kind of Greek lands. And the Greeks are like, we've had enough of that. So then they went to battle. And they basically obliterated the Galatians, but they left a population of them down here, which then thrived, and they became a group down within what we call Turkey today. And that was the Galatians that Paul wrote to. But some of them went up to where the Welsh were, speaking an ancient Celtic type of dialect. And, Welsh is a fascinating ancient Celtic language, actually. And, I've spoken in Wales, and there are names of towns that are like 14 syllables. I mean, you're like, where did this language come from? But that ancient language is called Gomerang. It actually uses the name Gomer in it. But Port of Gaul, Portugal, you see the name reflected in some of that. There's actually two major groups that are in Portugal, though. One of the groups that went out to China, there's about 30 different ethnic groups in China. One of them is the Mao people, or the Mitsao people. They're maybe the second or third, maybe I think the third most populous group in China. They have an ancient history that has a line that goes right back to Gomer. So I always thought, well, that's kind of neat. So at least some of them made it that far out. So if you look at the name Gaul, it actually is a variation of the name Gomer, if you understand the etymology of some of these ancient Celts and Gelts and Galatian groups. So this was actually published by Arthur Custance here. Arthur Custance, though, he did a lot of work on Noah's three sons, which he did a lot of, I think, really good work at the stuff surrounding the Tower of Babel. But if you look at the age of the earth from him, he was totally compromised on that, which is sad. John Gill also comments on some of this. If you guys are familiar with John Gill, he was a Baptist commentator. He was the guy who would write more than just about anybody in the world. This guy could write so much. But he was an incredible commentator. But even he was talking about the name Gomer and how it arrived at Gaul, that ancient name etymologically. Where'd the Canaanites and the Chinese come from? Man, who would have put those two together, right? Anybody here have any Chinese ancestry? Lacey, raise your hand. There you go. So my wife has, she's German, English, Irish, and Chinese. I'm a mutt. I've got German, English, Irish, Scottish, French, Portuguese, Swedish, Italian, and Native American that I know of. It's amazing. It's amazing. My kids are so pretty. But the land of Canaan, you guys know where the land of Canaan is. It's talked about over and over again in the Bible. In fact, 7 of the tribes of Canaan were overthrown by the Israelites in judgment because of their sin. And that was initially led by Joshua. And of course, the Israelites dealt with this sort of thing. Even in David's day, they were still fighting for some of what was going on. But one of the sons of Canaan was Cineas, if you Latinize it. But the name of the group was given as the Sinites. You might think of the Sinai Peninsula, wilderness of sin, and so forth. So you have some of that, Mount Sinai, for example. But did you notice that by the time Moses went in there with the Israelites, they weren't there? They'd already left. Where'd they go? That's an interesting question, isn't it? They went likely all the way out to the Orient. And we get hints of this actually in Scripture. In Isaiah, it's talking about people coming from afar, far from the east. They're coming to the west, way far back over there from the land of Sinim. And the ancient commentators, even ancient geographers like Strabo and so forth, these guys have all commented, this is the land of China. That's what we're talking about here. Even John Gill points that out, the connection between Sinites and the Chinese. Ptolemy would comment on this sort of thing as well. We even see a reflection of that in recent centuries when Japan and China went to war against each other, it was the Sino-Japanese War. They still utilize that particular name. There's a connection there. So yeah, they went that far out there. They were the dominant group. Yeah, some of the descendants of Gomer made it out there, but these guys have largely dominated that area. Where'd the Greeks and the Japanese come from? Well, the Hebrew name for Greece in the Old Testament, every time you see Greek or Greece in there, that's Javan. It's the Hebrew name Javan. That's one of Noah's grandsons came through there. So obviously the Greek tribes were in here. He had 4 sons. Well, one of those sons was Tarshish, which I'd mentioned over here. So that made it all the way out to Spain. Cyprus, some of these guys went this far. They went farther, though. Some of them went way out there, out and about. But they went out. Javan, you can see here in Daniel, Kingdom of Greece. That's Javan. It's literally behind that. It's literally the Kingdom of Javan was going to rise up as that empire, that third empire before Rome. Acts 20, verse 2, when you get to the New Testament, it uses one of Javan's sons as one of the names. So you still see a reflection of those particular Greek tribes there. But some of them went out and about, and I'm not kidding. They went all the way out here. Java Island is massively populated. It was an early seaport. The Greeks were seafaring people. They went all over the place. And, you know, the name Javan is actually the island, Java Island. They still use it today as the Javan tiger and so forth. Others went on up, went as far as Japan. When Spanish chroniclers first got there, and they're going through with the Japanese who their ancient ancestors were, they recognized them as Tarshish or Tharshish, which is one of the sons of Javan. Now, I don't know if Jonah was trying to get that far away. I guess it is possible, but my guess is he was actually trying to go to the Tarshish that was in Spain. But yeah, it just gives you an idea how far some of these guys have gone. What about the Egyptians? The Hebrew name for Egypt is Mitzrayim. This is one of Noah's grandsons. Some translations just put Egypt in there, but others put Mitzrayim. That's how that's pronounced. It looks like Mizraim, but Mitzrayim is how they typically pronounce that, at least in the Hebrew tongue. But they're right down in this particular area. They spread out. One of Mitzrayim's sons, the Libabos, or there's variant names of some of that, but that's where the Libyans came from. The name we still have the name Libya even to this day. Some of Mitzrayim went out and settled between China and India, to a region known as Mesran. Also reflects the name there too. Where'd the Africans come from? There's a lot of groups of people who went to Africa. Africa's gigantic, by the way. It's a huge continent. But you obviously have Mitzrayim up here in what's Egypt and Libya and kind of down south there just a little bit. Other groups have come in and conquered the Egyptians as well and intermixed. But Put was out here, and a lot of the Moorish groups came out of Put. The Olmec in America actually spoke a language very similar to that of West Africa. And, you know, it was interesting. The Olmec had a written language. A lot of people in the Americas didn't have a written language. They'd have certain code and certain, symbols. But as for a full written language, the Olmec had one. And people would look at that and they tried to connect it to other people in the Americas, and it just didn't work. And people had no idea. They were massively confused for a long time. And then finally, there were some experts in West African languages that looked at it. And one guy in particular was like, I can read this. Here's what it says. And they're like, oh, wow, there's a connection. So did they transverse the Atlantic Ocean? It's possible. It really is. Some of the others that made it down to Africa was Cush. So the Ethiopians still call themselves Cushites to this day and conquered a lot of those areas. Some of them are down in various regions where, oh boy, there's a lot of instability in the Middle East in certain places. But some of the Cushites remained in the Middle East. Some of them went all the way out. There's the Hindu Kush, descendants of Seba. There's even genetic connections between some of the Australian Aborigines and some of the tribes of Kush. So that just gives you an idea where they went and how they spread out. Of course, a lot of seafaring peoples came around and went all the way around and put a whole bunch of little cities and villages and places all around the continent as well that kind of grew a little bit. What about the Turks? Turks came out of Japheth, Gomer, and Togarmah. Togarmah's descendants went up in this direction. All the Turkish groups came out of there. A lot of the Turks came in here after the Byzantine Empire was waning in power. They came down and conquered that particular area. And that's why you have Turks in the land of Turkey today, even though there's a lot of other groups that are in there. Russians came out of Magog. A lot of people are familiar with that if they've studied eschatology and so forth. But Scythia was right up in here. Some of the Scythians came out here, and that's where the Scots and Irish came from, remember, and some of the Milesians. But some of the Russians were up here, the southern Russians, that is, are descendants of Magog. You go to the north part of of Russia, up near Moscow and those regions, some of the Baltic states, perhaps Finland and some of the others up in there, they're descendants of Meshech. Meshech in Moscow. Moscow is actually a variant name of Meshech. There's still the Meshera lowland and the Meshera State Park out there that have that name. Cappadocia is fascinating. If you look at Cappadocia, that's where they had the big underground cities during Coup and some of those places. Kind of neat. So yeah, there's a lot of connections in that. Whew, are you guys tired yet? It gets tough looking at all these maps. It really does. Do you guys know anything about your own ancestry? A little bit here and there. So what I found with audiences is like when they see theirs, they're like, "Oh, that's really cool." Oh, the others are like, "Oh boy, are we done yet?" But Indians, this is those in India particularly. A lot of the tribes that settled into India, they actually came out of Arabia originally, and they were descendants particularly of Joktan. Arabic writers are talking about Joktan, saying that he had 31 sons by one woman, one of them all total. They said all except 2 left Arabia and settled in India. So if you look at Joktan at the Tower of Babel, he actually had 13 sons at the Tower of Babel before they spread out. So they go down into Arabia. A lot of them crossed over. When you get farther away, it gets tougher. Native Americans, Australian Aborigines, there is that connection between the Aborigines and some of the Cushites in Ethiopia, probably through Seba. Now, that's actually been more recent. That was because of genetic studies that people have connected that one together. I've always thought the Australian Aborigines showed up later. They didn't get there quickly after the Tower of Babel. And one of the reasons is in the late 1700s, when the British explorers started to colonize, they actually went out and said, well, how many Aborigines are here? And so they actually did counts on them. There's about 300,000 of them on the entire continent, which isn't very many if you think about that. So you got to think by the 1700s, small population, they probably showed up later on. And yet we're told over and over again by the secular world, that's the oldest group. They've been there for 60,000 years. Well, where's all the bodies? Where's all the graves? If they've been there for 60,000 years, there should be trillions and trillions of people on that continent. They're only about 300,000, so it's much lower. And I comment on some of that in the book. But for the Native Americans, though, there's a lot of different groups that made it over to the Americas. One of them is Tyrus. Tyrus is the name Thrace. There's the Tigris River. I think Bulgaria, some of those areas. Some of the Italian groups, Tyrrhenian Sea and so forth, were in this area. And they've intermixed with a host of different groups. There's other groups that went into Italy as well. The Anacotti in Scotland came out of Tyrus. Did they go on over? Yeah, it suggests they would have. And there's good reasons for some of that. I don't have time to go into all of it right now. But different groups that came across from Asia did come around this way. This is the way the secular world has most people coming over. But remember, seafaring peoples can get there just as easily. The Vikings had made it over. We've been finding more and more rune stones going all the way up the Mississippi River. So they've made it to a lot of different places. They've even found some Minoan writing in certain places that has shocked people, and even some genetics in central parts of America to some of the natives that connect back to the Minoans there in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. That kind of surprises people. But some of the groups that I've been able to trace over, Magog, the Sinites, Tagarma, Gomer, Tyrus, Ashkenaz, Put. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of different groups that made it over. Put is where the Olmec came from, coming from West Africa there. If you just step back, boom. You can see where they get to one place, they spread out in those areas. So a lot of history to some of this. The name of Cush's son Seba in Southeast Asian area. I think the Malay Peninsula, as you go down in there, there's actually tribes still call themselves Seba in those different areas. And now they go all the way down, potentially extending down into Australia. And that might be the Cush line through Seba that way, to how they got down there. But yeah, remember the Ice Age. People and animals could walk to some of these places. But yeah, don't forget they're seafaring as well. That's how animals got to a lot of parts of the world too. Some of them by land bridges, others, they were dropped off. During the age of exploration, people dropped animals off all over the place. They took rats all over the world. They didn't mean to, but they did. So, okay, let's stop on the maps for just a moment. What'd you guys think of that? Do you guys have any questions about the maps and some of the people? It's interesting. There's so many more we could put on there. And in that book, The Tower of Babel, I've got a lot more people groups, and a lot of the references are in there as well, too. But, when I looked at all this, what I did first was the Bible. What does the Bible say about these different groups? If the Bible doesn't give us much information, We have their name. That's about it. Then I go to the history from elsewhere, and I say, okay, well, how do they connect? What's going on here? And there's so much more. I mean, we're literally just scratching the surface on this. Nate Jeanson, a friend of mine, he's a geneticist from Harvard originally. He works in Answers in Genesis. He's a brilliant guy, by the way. When he writes stuff that's layman, it's still technical. That's how brilliant the guy is. But he's been doing genetic studies. And I've had a lot of people ask me that question. They say, hey, Bodie, you did all this stuff on the Tower of Babel, these different people groups. Dr. Jeanson, he's doing all this stuff genetically. How do you guys line up? Now, we've actually sat down a few times and had some good conversations over it. And I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 85% of the time, we totally overlapped. To me, that was amazing. I was hoping when we went in there that we were off, let's not be off, let's not overlap by like 10%. 85% was great. If there are people that said, well, why isn't it 100% overlapping? What's going on here? I said, what you have to understand is there's a lot of history that we don't know of people groups. And because we don't know that history, we don't know sometimes what happens. Sometimes entire histories are wiped out for a people group because they get conquered, their things are burnt, they're destroyed. Sometimes they're captured and they're taken into slavery or captivity and they're removed to somewhere else. So genetic lines are going to stay genetic lines no matter what. But sometimes we don't understand that history. One of the things that we had two differences on were the Sinites in China. What's interesting is the Chinese, they'll call themselves Sinites. They use the name. We have the connection. The ancient historians all affirm it. Yet genetically, he had them coming out of the line of Shem. And I was like, well, that's really weird. So we're trying to look at it, trying to figure out, well, what's going on? So there's a couple things that could happen. Number one, was it that a number of descendants of Shem ended up out in the Far East, and then over the years, they've just intermixed together, and the male line, which is what he's looking at, happened to dominate from Shem for that people group? That's possible. That's one thing. There's over 30 different ethnic groups in China. A number of them are from Shem. So that does make sense. The other thing is what happened to the Sinites before they ever went out to China? Remember the Sinai Peninsula and what's going on in there? If you look at some of what's going on, a lot of Abraham's descendants were going in, conquering that whole area. Not just Moses and the Israelites, but the Edomites and some of the descendants, of course, of Esau and Ishmael and some of Abraham's other sons. They're conquering that whole area. Did they conquer the Sinites and the Semitic male line get in there before they ever went out to China? That's possible. You see, we don't understand all that history. And so I actually thought it was brilliant that we overlapped 85%, because if we matched up 100% or 95%, people say you guys are faking the data. So 85% to me was absolutely amazing. It just goes to show, hey, there's some history, guys, we just don't know. And there may be some other things going on there that we still don't know. So I just wanted to stop and kind of pause on that for just a moment, even though I don't have the slides on some of that. I am writing an article on some of that. Any extra biblical accounts of a language split? Yeah, they're all over the world, actually. We know we have flood legends and creation legends all over the world. We have Tower of Babel legends as well. Let me just give you a couple of these. In the days of old, the gods, remember the gods in there? They outlived everybody else, but they still died. Yeah, so we're talking early people after Babel here. So in the days of old, they had the whole earth distributed among them by allotment. There was no quarreling, for you cannot rightly suppose that the gods did not know what was proper for each of them to have, or knowing this, that they would seek to procure for themselves by contention that which more properly belonged to others. You see? See that connection there? Here's another one. This one actually came from the Maidu Indians of California. Says that everybody spoke the same language until during preparations for a special burning ceremony, when suddenly in the night, everyone began to speak a different tongue, except that each husband and wife talked the same language. You know what's neat about that? This is a legend that goes here in the Americas, and yet they got it right. Husbands and wives, God honored the sanctity of marriage even through the Tower of Babel. Split them up by their family groups. So it just gives you a taste of some of that. Are you guys ready for a break? All right, let's take a break here. I do want to put a picture of that book up here. This particular book, Tower of Babel, and there's a DVD as well. If you guys ever get the opportunity to get that, you'll see the references. I've got a lot more maps and stuff like that you could actually follow for each of these groups as well, and a lot of these questions and so much more. But let's go ahead and take a break. What do we have, about 10 minutes or so? Okay, well, let's do that, and then we'll come back. Check. Good. All right. We got 93% of people back. I think we're ready to start. No. Hopefully we have everyone. All right. Halloween, paganism, the Bible. And yet it's almost Easter. How weird is this? You'd think I'd be giving one of my Easter talks, but I'm not. I wanted to give a Halloween talk because this is a powerful talk. And I remember one of the first times that I'd given this talk, I'd given it a few times, but I walked in and, lecture hall, there's a number of people in there, and I give the lecture and I don't think anything of it. And then I walk off the stage and they're like, we had 102,000 people watching you online. And I'm like, that's a lot of people. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, why didn't somebody tell me? I would have been really nervous going up there on stage if I knew it was 102,000 people watching me online. So, it was pretty amazing. I didn't realize they got it out to these different TV stations and stuff too. And so I don't even know how many ultimately saw it. But I love the subject because a lot of times Christians don't know how to deal with Halloween. And it's a tough time. It's a tough struggle. And I've had people come up and say, okay, talk to me about Halloween. What's going on? I've chatted with a lot of pastors, a lot of Christian leaders saying, hey, how do we deal with this subject? One of the questions that I get all the time on Halloween is why orange? Believe it or not, I get that question all the time. Why is orange a color of Halloween? You think of Christmas and you think of like green and red, right? You think of Easter and you think of the pastel colors. And all of a sudden we get orange. So I actually did a bunch of research on this and come to find out it has to do with a pumpkin. That's ultimately the reason for orange. It was kind of a letdown. I was like, really? Pumpkin? Okay, there you go. All right, so who is it out there that loves Halloween? Stores. Stores love Halloween. I usually look up the numbers. It's somewhere around $7 to $10 billion every year. These were the numbers from 2021. It really hasn't changed too much since then. Over $10 billion. It's just crazy. They do it on costumes. That's dress up, trick or treating, decorations. Many of the decorations are questionable, of course. Who doesn't like Halloween? Besides you guys, insurance companies. Insurance companies don't like it. But believe it or not, there's a lot of bad things that happen on Halloween, and insurance companies brace themselves. Arson is very, very prominent in a lot of places. Detroit, it used to be just terrible. They've been trying to crack down on it, but arson's terrible. Pins and poison and candy. Believe it or not, that does happen. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. When I say the middle of nowhere in Western Illinois, like Illinois is fairly populated. I mean, obviously Chicago is crazy populated. Western Illinois, where I'm at, it's not populated. There are by far more deer, more cows, more chickens, more everything than people. We have like 6,000 people or so in our whole county. Yet it was still very conservative. But there was one year, my family let us go trick-or-treating. I'm out there with some friends, and we go trick-or-treating and get all this candy because that's what kids care about. It's the candy. So I got candy, right? I come home, and my dad gets his phone call, and next thing you know, my dad grabs my candy. He's going through it, and he found a pin in it because some of the people we were with found a pin in one of their little chocolate bars, Snickers or something like that. And so my dad took all my candy and threw it in the trash. I remember, Dad, what are you doing? I was like, it's just a pen. That was the mentality of me as a kid. But that stuff really does happen. In fact, one of the big things is, people passing out fentanyl in candy and disguising it and so forth. So there's those types of dangers. Theft. My first year when I moved out to Kentucky, on Halloween, I actually left my house for just a few hours. By the time I got back, somebody had broke in, stolen my Arrowhead collection, my DVD player, back when DVDs, you guys know what a DVD player is? Thought I'd better check. They actually took a whole case of Christian CDs. Who does that? I don't know. Maybe they read the lyrics and got saved or something. I don't know. But yeah, it really does happen. Occult activity, spikes on Halloween. Crime spikes are crazy sometimes. Evidence shows that across both the United States and Canada, crime rates generally spike on Halloween as compared to other consumer holidays. Some places release their crime statistics. Boston does that. And you'll see, crime, massive spike of crime, 50% increase on Halloween. So yeah, insurance companies don't like it. But see, when we look at Halloween, I want to step back and use the Bible. Let's start with the Bible to look at subjects Whether it's Christmas, whether it's Easter, whatever subject you're looking at, but even Halloween, let's not give up the Bible when we look at that subject. So I want to train you guys to start looking at things biblically. Okay, you guys ready? All right, here we go. What is biblically wrong with this picture? It is the order of everything in here. See, people look at it and they're like, oh, those are elements of Halloween. No. Those are all things that God created. Remember? Yeah, it's suffering under sin and curse and so forth. But the answer is the pumpkin should be first because God created the plants. Then the moon, day 4. Then the bat, day 5, flying and sea creatures. Then the cat, day 6. See how we start to think biblically about some of these things? We're going to step back and look at this stuff from a biblical viewpoint. So these are things created by God. Yes, we're in a sin, cursed, and broken world. Now, there are aspects of Halloween that are rooted in paganism, particularly pagan customs and so forth. I actually looked up all sorts of different things that are done on Halloween. Some of these actually do go back to pagan roots and stories and accounts and so forth. The jack-o'-lantern did, trick-or-treating did, costume masks, obviously ghost stories. I didn't realize this. Bobbing for apples, somehow, I can't even remember what it was now, but it went back to some sort of pagan tradition. And I'm like, really, bobbing for apples? I remember as a kid, our school used to do that. We'd get these buckets of, throw all these apples at as dirty as anything. And you're like, trying to grab one. I'm like, I look back. Do you guys do bobbing for apples? Oh my goodness. But black cats crossing your path. Yeah, I mean, that's some of that. Now, there was a black cat that crossed my path when I was a child. I was, when you're a kid, you're in a bicycle riding phase, you get the banana boat bikes, the old Schwinn's and stuff like that, right? So here I was, maybe 5th or 6th grade. I was in that phase. And I lived out in the country, but my grandma lived in town, so my friends were in town. And I was riding a bicycle right in front of my grandma's house. Had a nice little gradual down. It was paved. It was nice, and I'm just riding this bike as fast as I can down this thing. And way up ahead of me, this black cat ran across my path. And I'm like, I don't believe in that stuff. I get down there closer to where that cat was, ran back out. Front tire hit that cat. And I still remember to this day, my bike stopped. I didn't. I went flying. I remember being in the air like, this is going to hurt. I got like a tank top on and shorts, and I just skidded on that pavement. Cat didn't like it either. Cat got up and took off, and I was mad at that cat. I was in so much pain. I walked that bike to my grandma's house, just bawling my eyes out. Yeah, well, those are things that happen. But paganism, I've used that word a few times, paganism. And the topic of this talk is Halloween paganism in the Bible. So what is paganism? Let me give you the technical definition of paganism. It is a polytheistic or pantheistic nature-worshiping religion. So that doesn't really help you any. Let me break that down. Poly means many, theistic means God. So any religion that has a multitude of gods is typically a pagan type of religion. Or any pantheistic, basically everything is God. Basically the universe is God or nature is God. Those are forms of paganism. So there's actually 2 different forms of paganism. Now, just to kind of clarify, there is Indian paganism, which is like Hinduism. Yeah, they have a multitude of gods, but theirs is different because they're all manifestations of a single god, Brahman and so forth. But I don't want to go into the details of all that. But some people denote that differently than normal paganism. But yeah, paganism is like a broad overview that has a whole bunch of different sub-religions up under it. So a little bit more about this. Any of the mythological religions, think of Greek mythology or any of those ones that had ancestor worship I mentioned in the last talk, would be paganism. Wicca, witchcraft, is a form of paganism as well. Interesting, Wicca and witchcraft, that's the religion that has a female as the ultimate deity. That's the only one that I know of. After all the study of world religions, that's the only one that I could find that had a female as the supreme deity. And it's interesting how many people want to say, oh, God's a female. Have you heard some of that nowadays? The governor of Kentucky said that God is a woman. And it's like, you just preached witchcraft right there in front of everyone, whether you realized it or not. Obviously, the occult is paganism. Some of the Eastern religions kind of can be, like I said, but a lot of times that's denoted differently. Indian paganism, whether it's the Hinduism, whether it's Taoism or New Age and so forth. Any form of ancestor worship or nature worship. And yes, that does include evolution, millions of years, naturalism, atheism. that is a form of paganism. A lot of people don't realize it because it is pantheistic. They basically look at the universe and say the universe is God, the universe is supreme, the universe is absolute. Consider Carl Sagan. Some of you guys may not have any clue who Carl Sagan was. He did an old TV series called Cosmos. Neil deGrasse Tyson redid that more recently, kind of talking about different aspects of the cosmos. But he was famous in his opening. The cosmos is all that is or ever was or ever will be. That is as pantheistic paganism as it gets right there. He just states it. So let's look at Halloween a little bit more at its history. When did modern day Halloween get its start in the United States? Because you go back to, say, the founding fathers of this country just a couple hundred years ago, people are like, what's Halloween? There wasn't a whole lot about that. But, you get to the 1950s, it's exploded. So let's go back here and understand where it came from. So Halloween was actually brought over by a lot of migrating people, the Scots and the Irish in particular. Think of the potato famine in Ireland. A lot of Irish came over, some of the Scots came over, and they brought Halloween with them. This is one of their ancient festivals that they brought over. This is typically in the mid-1800s, early 1900s, to give you an idea. So who exactly were the Celts? We already talked a little bit about this in the last one. The Celts are some of the descendants of Gomer. Gomer and Gaul, Gelt, Celt, the G's and C's kind of interchange. So some of those particular groups. But also, if you want to understand a little bit more about some of the Irish and the Scots and what's going on in the British Isles, you have other groups that came in there. The Angles and Saxons that came out of Ashkenaz ended up over there. So they're intermixing, and you have some of those groups that are promoting some of this ancient Halloween festival. Some of the descendants of Magog, this is where the Scots and the Irish came from, as well as some of those Celtic groups that intermixed. And one other group is the descendants of Tubal. Some of Tubal's descendants end up in this particular area as well. And this is all significant as we get to stuff here in just a little bit. But if you want to find out more about some of those different groups, again, there's a book, The Tower of Babel. But these ancient Celts had a festival called Halloween. Now, they didn't call it Halloween. They actually called it by another name. They called it Samhain. That's how it's pronounced. It looks like Samhain, but it's Samhain is how they pronounced it. And we have records of this going back over 2,000 years ago. Some of the Roman records recorded them having it. Just to give you an idea what it is, it's basically a Day of the Dead. Okay? Day of the Dead, they celebrate death, they celebrate sacrifice and all sorts of things. They would sacrifice animals, plants, and in some of the ancient times, they were actually sacrificing people. They actually have drawings of what that would look like. I'll show you some of that later. But it was meant to honor the dead. It was primarily run by the Druids. The Druids were more like the priestly class, the leaders, the judges, and the scholars of the Celtic classes, particularly in Britain and Ireland. They had deviated into a path of paganism. They had actually a lot of similarities with Hinduism. Not only were they polytheistic, but they also believed in a form of reincarnation and ancestor worship. So if you're going to get sacrificed, no big deal. People can worship you now and you'll be reincarnated anyway. You see, so there's the convincing aspects of some of this paganism. So let's talk a little bit more about these Druids. They tended to meet in groves, caves, remote valleys that they held sacred. They took over places like Stonehenge. Stonehenge was actually older than the Druids. The Druids are about 700 BC or so, but Stonehenge was built well before that, going back probably early days, not long after the Tower of Babel. But they took over Woodhedge, Swinside, Avebury, a number of these different stone circles. Stonehenge isn't the only one. They're all over the place in various areas there in Northern Europe, as well as here in the Americas. There's a number of them. But here's what's interesting. The Druids claim to be descendants from their ancestor, Dis Pater, who was also known as Pluto or Tubal. See the connection there? So you see some of that going back to the Tower of Babel and some of those people groups. So how did this festival called Samhain, how did it even become Halloween in the first place? Well, let's start to understand some of the history going on mainland Europe. So in the early AD 600s, there was a festival called All Saints' Day on May 13th to honor the saints. You know, God has certain holidays. We're made in the image of God. So, you know, we oftentimes come up with our own holidays as well. So we do that. We're made in the image of God. So they did this. This was done May 13th. Well, this Day of the Dead, this Celtic Samhain festival was so popular, which was November 1st, that they're like, boy, we have to have some sort of alternative to this, because the Christians just could not battle that. So they wanted to have a Christian alternative to it, to the Day of the Dead. So in the AD 700s, one of the leaders of the church back in those days, he switched All Saints Day to November 1st as an alternative. So you have the Samhain festival from the Celts being run by the Druids, and now they moved All Saints Day to the same day to compete with it. Okay, so what ends up happening? All Saints Day exploded. It was like the Christmas of the Middle Ages. Anybody who was anywhere, boom, on All Saints Day, you were there, you were at church. You know how there are people who go to church twice a year, Christmas and Easter? Yeah, back then it was like go on All Saints Day, right? That was the biggest day of the year. You know, even some of these, this is back in the 1400s. This is actually an old painting that was done to show, hey, this is how popular this was. It was the big day. So what happened was the evening before that became known as All Hallows Eve or All Hallows Evening, and that was simply shortened to Halloween. So October 31st became known as Halloween, with All Saints Day being the very next day. Now, there's actually a connection to all this to Martin Luther, because October 31st is Reformation Day. So why would the 95 Theses be nailed on October 31st? That's the best day of the year. The door of the church was like the bulletin board. If you want to reach the most number of people, like let's say my kids need to get married, I go put it on the church bulletin board, right? Yeah, same sort of thing back then. You want people to read the 95 Theses, you put it up on the door of the church, but not just any day. You want to put it up the day before the most number of people are going to show up to church. You see? So there's a connection. It was put up there on October 31st because the next day is All Saints Day. Everybody's going to be at church. You see? So yeah, he puts that up there, or at least somebody did. I know people debate over who, whether it was Martin Luther himself or someone else nailed it up there, but it's up there. So the next day is All Saints Day. Well, here's what happened. All Saints Day is huge, but it didn't just erase that Samhain festival. It continued to be super popular. And what happened is the days kind of started to merge. You have a Day of the Dead and All Saints Day kind of all put together. So what the church did in those days, they just said, oh, we can't get rid of it. How about, because of its persistence, let's just add November 2nd to be All Souls Day to honor the dead, and we'll just kind of move it to the day after. So it turns into a 3-day festival, All Hallows Eve, All Saints Day, and All Souls Day, and it became a 3-day festival. It's a big deal. So that's kind of where the name Halloween came from. By the time people brought it over here to the States, people were forgetting about All Saints Day and All Souls Day, and it was Halloween, you see. Joel Beakey, a friend of mine, we had him write up a chapter on what did the reformers believe about the age of the earth. So, yeah, there's a relationship to the reformers, to Halloween, and to everything that was going on there in the 1500s. And that even relates to our subject today, dealing with the age of the earth, the authority of the scriptures, even now. So it's hard to believe that, yeah, we're talking about Halloween. It still relates to this particular subject. But this is actually a little booklet. You can find this pretty easily. Okay, Days of the Dead. Let's get back to this. So Days of the Dead. What nation is famous for their Day of the Dead? Mexico. Disney even did a little movie on it for the kids, right? Coco? Wasn't that what it was? Yeah, so yeah, there's other places that had Day of the Dead. But there's another ancient culture that was known for their Day of the Dead. Rome. Rome had a Day of the Dead. It was called Feralia and Parentalia. It was actually a 7-day festival. Began with Feralia and ended in Parentalia. But that was their Day of the Dead. And it was actually similar in time frame when the Celtic Day of the Dead was. So they actually fueled each other. So you can kind of see why it was tough for All Saints Day to conquer all this because, well, it wasn't just one place that had a Day of the Dead. You now have two. Now, don't you understand? They weren't the only ones. There were others in Europe that also had a Day of the Dead. But they're not the only ones. They're all over the world, actually. Yeah, the Celts, the Romans had it. Mexico's known for it. The Aztecs have it. The Olmec had it. The Iroquois had it. Bolivians have it. Brazil have it. You go over to Asia, boom, Ghost Festival in China. Japan has the Oban Festival. These are all their Day of the Dead festivals. Vietnam has it. Nepal, Korea, in India they have it. The Philippines. I'm just giving you a small taste of some of the places that have a Day of the Dead. Japan, the Bond Festival. I want to go back to that one for a moment. How many of you guys have seen Karate Kid? How many of you guys went so far as to see the second movie? Some of the hands. Okay, so in the second movie, they're over in Japan, right? And there's this big festival going on. That was the Bond Festival, the Day of the Dead Festival, that they're battling, they're calling on the ancestors and so forth. In that movie, a lot of people don't realize that's what that was. There's that connection even in movies like that. But days of the dead, they're all over the place. So here's the question. Is there a connection between Halloween and all these other days of the dead? I'd suggest they are. If you look at some of the commonalities among these different days of the dead all over the world, it was to honor the dead, the ancestors, the souls of them. Many of these were about the same time frame, the end of summer to mid-fall, kind of right in there, a little ranging over a couple of months. Some of them were actually surprisingly close to each other date-wise. They were meant to remember remembrance of sins, and they would have sacrifices. Yeah, there's a lot of commonalities. Do you think that this Day of the Dead festival goes all the way back to a time when all these cultures were connected? Yeah, I would suggest, yeah, absolutely. So what is the original source of Halloween and these other days of the dead? There are some ancient scholars that looked into this, or not ancient, but they're looking at ancient sources. John Ukehart, back in 1931, he published this. He said he was talking about the connection going all the way back to flood sacrifices. That's how far back he was saying they went to. Here's another scholar, Alfred Rehwinkel, professor of Concordia Seminary. Back in the 1950s, he said, hey, he realized that nations throughout the world had a similar Day of the Dead. And he directly related this to the flood of Noah's day. Now, it's not specifically the flood. It's specifically the sacrifices after the flood. Noah comes off the ark. They offered sacrifices of the clean animals. Well, that was a yearly sacrifice. So they have that sacrifice from the flood going all the way through the Tower of Babel. Then, boom, people go all over the world, and they take that sacrifice with them. Is the event of Noah's sacrifice really where the Day of the Dead really originates? It's possible. It was a time when there was a sacrifice to cover sins and a reminder why death reigns in this sin-cursed world. It was a spiritual time, a time when people remembered that a disaster, the global flood, took virtually the entire population as a punishment for sins. Halloween's roots really could extend back this far. But I want you to understand, sacrifice was even before the flood. Sacrifice goes all the way back to the very first sacrifice. Sorry, I'm kind of popping in my microphone here. So what is the relationship between sacrifice and God's word? Deuteronomy 32:4. He is a rock. This is speaking of God. His work is perfect. For all his ways are justice, a God of truth and without injustice, righteous and upright as he. Every work of God is perfect. That's what we expected from God, right? When God created everything in 6 days and rested on the seventh, it was perfect. That's what we expected from a perfect God. Genesis 1:31. Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. In Hebrew, this is exceeded good, if such a thing were possible. It really was perfect. So we have this perfect creation, but we're not in a perfect creation anymore. When Adam and Eve sinned against God, everything changed. Satan fell. He sinned himself through his pride. Then he influences the serpent to deceive the woman. She ate. She gave fruit to her husband, and he ate. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. That means begin to die, start to die, more of an aggressive sense. Genesis 3:21, when Adam and Eve sinned against God, they realized they were naked, and they were ashamed. They tried to hide from God. They took fig leaves, and they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Have you guys ever felt fig leaves? They're kind of like itchweed. And it causes a horrible rash. That tells me they were in a hurry to cover themselves up. Their eyes were open. They realized they'd made a mistake. Punishment for sin was death. The solution had to involve death. Those fig leaf coverings were not good enough. The punishment for sin required a blood sacrifice. Look what the Lord did in Genesis 3:21. And for Adam and his wife, the Lord God made tunics of skin and clothed them. Those plants were not good enough. The sacrifice required a blood sacrifice. God sacrificed animals to make coverings for them. Now I want you to understand a big picture aspect of all this. The punishment from an infinite and eternal the punishment from an infinite and eternal God would technically be an infinite punishment that would go on forever. Are any of us in a position to be able to ultimately take that? No. What about animals? They couldn't take that punishment. What we really needed was an infinite sacrifice that could take the infinite punishment from the infinite Father. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who is God himself, stepped into history, took on flesh, became a man. And when Christ took that punishment, the infinite Son took the infinite punishment from the infinite Father. And because of his eternality, he could do it in a moment. The infinite Son took that punishment that we all deserve, the wrath of God poured out on Christ. Those animal sacrifices were not good enough. But if you notice, those sacrifices, Abel mimicked it. He offered fat portions. He offered a blood sacrifice. Cain didn't do that. Abel's was acceptable. Noah offers sacrifices. Abraham offers sacrifices. And they're all ultimately pointing to Jesus Christ, who's the ultimate sacrifice. But the world changed. God cursed the ground. He cursed the animal, sentenced man to die as a result of that. Sacrifice was instituted. And all the way up into today's day and age, we see all sorts of horrible atrocities, terrible things that have been occurring. And we're in a culture where people cry out and they say, God, why'd you make the world like this? Well, he didn't. He made it perfect. It's because of man's sin the world's like this. We see earthquakes and tsunamis and all sorts of terrible things. We want to cry out to God, or 9/11, or terrible hurricanes and just massacres and all sorts of things. Close ones die. And we want to say, God, why'd you make the world like this? He didn't. He made it perfect. It's because of man's sin the world's like this. Take heart. Christ stepped into history to save us from sin and death. It's really powerful what the Lord Jesus did. When we look out in the world, we see a world that's full of joy. We also see a world full of sorrow. We see a world full of life and a world full of death. We see a world full of love and a world full of hate. It makes sense from a Christian worldview because we still see a remnant of that beauty that's there. But we've been given a taste of what life is like without God. Just a taste. So what we need to do is look at these subjects in light of what God has to say. And when we look at sacrifice, going all the way back to the early pages of the Bible, we need to remember it was because of man's sin that death and suffering came into the world. That's why sacrifice exists in the first place. And death has reigned ever since then. So we see, Adam, he had sons and daughters, but he died. Seth died. Enosh died. Lamech died. Enoch didn't. We already talked about that one, right? The end of the book of Genesis, so Joseph died. You see, death reigns. And in these pagan worldviews, death is worshipped as the hero. You see, that's one of the biggest problems. Abel offered the sacrifices. We see that in Genesis chapter 4. We see Noah offering the sacrifices. That's in Genesis chapter 8. We see Abraham offered sacrifices, the Israelites offering sacrifices. But friends, it's all because of Jesus' sacrifice. For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ shall all be made alive. You see? So it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. And the last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Hebrews 9:26. He then would have had to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now, at the end of the ages, this is talking about Jesus, has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. He is the ultimate sacrifice. You see, that's why Christians don't sacrifice anymore. Muslims still want to sacrifice. There's other groups out there that are still trying to sacrifice, animistic tribes and so forth. Hebrews 9:12, not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood, he entered the most holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. He was the perfect, infinite, and eternal sacrifice. It could all be done in a moment. 2 Corinthians 5:21, for he made him, this is Christ, for he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. 1 John 1:7, but if we walk in the light, as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And the blood of Jesus Christ, his son, cleanses us from all sin. So let's get a biblical perspective of this for a moment. We need to step back, big picture. God made the world perfect. Because of man's sin, death and suffering came into the world. It's an intrusion. It's a brokenness that has now occurred. And through the blood of Jesus Christ, we look forward to restoration, being new heavens and a new earth. Just big picture there. But we're in a culture where people don't understand that big picture. Consider the statue. There's people that go up and they'll see these beautiful statues and they'll say, whoa, look how marvelous that is. It's beautiful. It's inspiring. Look at the workmanship and the artisanship on this. It's just amazing. Sometimes you have to have a kick. What are you talking about? It looks broken. Same sort of thing when we look at the world. We still see that remnant of beauty. We see beautiful things, beautiful actions, but we also see a brokenness that's in there. What are you talking about? It looks broken. Genesis 3:17. Because you've heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree, which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. You see, the curse has been put into effect. Romans chapter 8, we see that the whole creation groans and labors and birth pangs together until now. And that curse is going to be in effect until Revelation 22, verse 3. And there shall be no more curse. Isn't that amazing when you think about this big picture? The curse was instituted in Genesis chapter 3 as a result of our sin. Revelation chapter 22, verse 3, the curse will be no more. The last chapter in the Bible undoes what happens in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. God solves the problem. Let's get a biblical timeline then of all this. So let's just think about this. God created everything. According to most of the genealogies, it goes back about 4000 BC. Sacrifice, the fall, occurred very quickly after creation. Here, there's a bunny trail. I'm going to hit the button. Okay, I'm going to go on a bunny trail. I'm inspired by Don right now. Don likes his bunny trails. I like them once in a while. So, how long was it till they sinned? Archbishop James Ussher says it was on the 10th day of creation. 10th day of creation is when he has them. And he gets that from the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement was the 10th day on one of the calendars of the ancient Jews. And so 10th day in, that's when the Day of Atonement was, which is representative of sin and sacrifice. According to the Jews, it goes back to the very first sin and sacrifice in the Garden of Eden. So that's why Archbishop Ussher puts it on the 10th day. Is that the day? I don't know. It's a great question. So I mentioned that one time. I had a lady come up to me, and she's like, 10th day? That makes a lot of sense. I was like, oh, okay. I was like, why? What do you got for me? And she's like, well, a woman, Adam and Eve were perfect, right? And I'm like, yeah. And she goes, well, because they were perfect, then their body should have been perfect. They should have had no problem conceiving on the first try, right? Yeah, okay. And she's like, well, a woman's monthly cycle is 2 weeks in. So it had to be within the first 14 days that they sinned. Because, this all happened before they conceived Cain. And I looked at her, and I said, oh my God, I don't think about those things. You're brilliant. So there she was saying, yeah, 10th day makes a lot of sense. Was it 10 day? I don't know. That's a great question. But it had to be soon because it was before they conceived their first child, which they were commanded to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So it had to be very soon. So we still put this as about 4,000 years. Very soon afterwards. Sacrifice was instituted. Then we have the flood sacrifices, about 1,600 years later. The events at the Tower of Babel. Boom, now it goes all over the world. Time marker, Abraham, offering sacrifices. The Celts begin to dominate in the northwest part of Europe, particularly the British Isles, France, some of those places. Just to give you a time marker here, BC AD with Christ. And then you see All Saints Day and All Hallows Eve. All Souls Day is added. Boom, 1840s or so. You see some of the descendants of the Celts that are starting to bring this Halloween festival over to the United States. So big picture, this is what we're looking at. So when we look at the timeline of everything that's occurred, and then we start going, well, what do we do then with it? How do we deal with Halloween, the paganism itself? As Christians, what do we do? Well, first thing we need to do, we need to train ourselves. We need to train our children and our church members in apologetics. We need to be able to train them to understand what sacrifice is. When you run into somebody who still believes in sacrifice, and there are a number of people out there that still do, we need to explain the ultimate sacrifice has come. This is good news. Let me tell you the good news. You see? We need to get people to understand the Bible's true. That's where apologetics comes in handy. Creation apologetics, general apologetics. But all the while, preach the good news of salvation to those who need it. Matthew 28, this is the Great Commission. Go, therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I've commanded you. And lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. We're still supposed to be doing the same thing that the church has been doing since Jesus prescribed this. 2 Corinthians 11:13, but I fear, lest somehow, as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. See, we're in a culture today where the Bible comes under attack. It's come under attack more ways in today's day and age than it ever has been in the past. In the past, sometimes people tried to delete the Bible. They wouldn't let it get translated and so forth. We still see all of these types of attacks over and over again. People trying to discredit the Bible. But I want you to understand, we need to use the Bible as the absolute authority in every area. We have to do that. Because if you reject God as the absolute authority, by default, man becomes that authority. And that's a separate religion called humanism. Paganism is a form of humanism because they've already rejected God and his word and have elevated man's ideas to supersede it. And in today's culture, that pantheistic form of paganism, the atheism, Big Bang, and so forth, Man, it's all over out here, dominating our culture. Over and over again, I hear about Big Bang, millions of years, and evolution. That is a subset to the religion of humanism, the secular forms of it. That pantheistic form of paganism. That's in contrast to the Bible, which teaches creation, the fall, and the flood, and so forth. I've had people say, oh, but Bodie, this is science. It's science versus the Bible. I hear that all the time. It drives me nuts. I'm a science guy, remember? Science is observable and repeatable. Has anyone ever observed or repeated the Big Bang? Nope. Anyone ever observed or repeated millions of years? Nope. Anyone ever observed or repeated the changing of a single-celled organism like an amoeba into a goat? Nope. It's not science. It is a religion. It's being imposed on generations of kids in schools and various forms of it. There's secular humanism. There's atheism. There's new atheism, a very aggressive form of atheism, by the way. There's agnosticism, which says you can't know if God exists. Non-religious. If somebody says they're not religious, they've already rejected God and his word. That's a form of humanism. You see, there's a lot of forms of it. But look at this. Paganism. That's one of them. And what gets me is so many Christians are more than happy to take some of these secular ideas, Big Bang, millions of years, and evolution, and mix it with their Christianity. And what happens when you mix the two? Something has to give. And they usually give up the pages of the Bible. So what we need to do is we need to be discerning. When we're dealing with this issue, we need to be discerning, and we need to go back to the authority of the Bible on all this. You know, the Bible warns many times, take heed that you not be deceived. Do not be deceived. Do not be deceived. Do not be deceived. Why does the Bible keep telling Christians not to be deceived? Because we can be deceived. That's exactly right. You know, consider this. Trick. Sometimes you have to look carefully, don't you? Ooh. See the little evolutionary progression as they move up? But think of kids in this next generation. If I were to go into a state school and go talk to, say, freshmen in high school, and I say something about the tree of life, most of these kids are going to be like, yeah, Darwin's tree of life. We've been taught it. You know, you go up and you get all these different evolutionary descendants and stuff out of this tree. They're not thinking of the tree of life in the Bible, are they? They're using the same name, but they've got a different meaning behind it. The tree of life was next to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, both in the midst of the garden. No, they're thinking in terms of Darwin's. And I want you to understand, they call it the tree of life, but really it's a tree of death. Remember, death is worshipped as a hero in pagan worldviews, including a secular worldview. Proverbs 8:36 says, but he who sins against me wrongs his own soul. All those who hate me love death. Here's something that Carl Sagan said. The secrets of evolution are time and death. You have to have death to get rid of stuff so that something else can come in and replace it to go and move on to an onward and upward evolutionary kind of an idea. Time and death, they say, equals man. So see, death is worshipped as that hero. You have to have millions and billions of years of death, pain, struggling, suffering to lead up to man's existence. In the evolutionary worldview, they look at rock layers and they say, look at all this millions of years of death in these rock layers. We look at those same rock layers thinking, flood of Noah's day. Yeah, there's death in there. That's a judgment. See, we look at it differently. But don't some Christians buy into millions of years? Yeah, there are some, because they're taking it from the secular worldview and they're trying to mix it with their Christianity. And when they try to mix those two together, something gives. And it's usually Genesis. And as soon as you give up Genesis and you put millions of years into Genesis chapter 1, you've got problems. For example, you lose a loved one, God is now responsible for the death, not man's sin. Oh, God made the world this way. It's always been like this. No. See, they don't have a biblical understanding of death anymore. And this affected certain people. For example, Ted Turner. Very powerful man, actually. Turner is a strident non-believer, having lost his faith after his sister, Mary Jane, died of a painful disease. Look what he said here. I was taught that God was love and God was powerful, and I couldn't understand how someone so innocent should be made or allowed to suffer so. You see, he'd bought into millions and billions of years. He didn't have a biblical understanding of death. So he wanted to blame God for that death. And so what he did was he left any semblance of Christianity and walked over to an evolutionary worldview that worshipped death. This also affected Charles Darwin. Annie's cruel death destroyed Charles' tatters of belief in a moral, just universe. Later, he would say that this period chimed the final death knell for his Christianity. St. Charles now took a stand as an unbeliever. See, he'd bought into the long ages before that. He was heavily influenced by a man named Charles Lyell, which preached millions and billions of years in the rock layers. He tried to say, okay, well, God had millions and billions of years of death, pain, struggling, all this cruel, evil, terrible stuff. This is just terrible. He saw that it was bad. The problem was, now he wanted to blame God for it. And so what does he do? He walks away from any semblance of Christianity and now worships death in an evolutionary worldview. Consider that. When looking at God, they see death as an enemy, but they want to blame God for that death. But then they move over to an evolutionary position which hails death as the hero. See these rock layers? Chock full of death. But those are from the flood of Noah's day. See, when we have a proper understanding of it, that was a judgment upon sin. When we see these different rock layers that contain fossils, yeah, that was from the flood of Noah's day. Of course, we've had fossil layers since that time, but most are from the flood of Noah's day. Well, what about the age of the earth then? Because this idea of millions and billions of years is coming from rock layers. If these rock layers are evidence of millions and billions of years, or if they're from the flood, all of a sudden you got a battle over the age of the earth. Exodus 20, verse 11, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, seeing all that's in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. 6 days. Hey, is it too hard for an all-powerful God to make everything in 6 days? No, it's all too easy. Sometimes you got to step back. God, why'd you take so long? Oh, well, he took so long because he was doing it as a model for our work week. You see? Work for 6 days, rest for a seventh. Then we have the Lord's Day. Tack that in. We have a weekend. The secular world loves weekends, but that's a Christian holiday. See that? They have to borrow that. But yeah, God creates everything in 6 days. The earth, for example, was created on day 1. Adam was created on day 6. You have about 5 days in between there. You add up the genealogies from Adam to Abraham, you get about 2,000 years. You just follow the genealogies. It gives you all the data there in Genesis chapter 5 and Genesis chapter 11. It's simple addition. Tally it up. Boom, here you go. You get about 4,000 years from Abraham till today. So rough estimate, you get about 6,000 years. Archbishop James Ussher, Floyd Nolan Jones, they both arrived at 4004 BC. There's been a host of other chronologists that have tallied it up. Some are a little higher, some are lower. There's a few places it's not straightforward to calculate, but they hover around 4000 BC. A little bit more, a little bit less. I actually tallied it up myself. I was just a few years off from Ussher. So I was actually surprisingly close to him. He found where there was a father-son co-reigning, so he had to subtract a year on some spots. And so I was like, oh, I think he was right. I was wrong on some of that. But the point is, you don't get millions and billions of years of death from the Bible. Instead, you find that death is the punishment for sin. This idea of millions and billions of years does not come from Scripture. Instead, it comes from outside of Scripture, and people are trying to impose that onto the Scriptures. So let's look at this evolution and paganism a little bit closer. They both oppose God and His Word. So they're both wrong right off the bat, because God's always right. Remember that. They both tend to love death. Remember that verse, Proverbs 8:36? But he who sins against me wrongs his own soul. All those who hate me love death. The secrets of evolution are time and death. You have to have millions of years of death and pain and struggling. Death is the hero in an evolutionary worldview. It's the same thing in any other pagan worldview. All these different pagans would do all sorts of horrible sacrifices and terrible things. This one here in the middle, this is one of the old drawings of how the Druids would do sacrifices for their Samhain festival, their Halloween festival, if you will. They would take these big cages and they would take people and they'd force them into it, usually their enemies. They'd lock them into it. They'd throw oil on them, light it on fire, and listen to them scream. It was terrible, the evil things that they would do. But look at this. Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood. The most merciful thing a large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. That's all paganism. You see, death is the hero in their worldviews. 1 Corinthians 10:20. No, I imply that what pagans sacrifice, they offer to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be participants with demons. And Halloween glorifies in that death, doesn't it? It really does. But here's the power in it. Christ was put to death on that cross. But he didn't stay in that grave, did he? Christ conquered death. As Christians, we have the answer to death. That's in Jesus Christ, through what he did. We have that good news to be able to share with people. It's powerful. I want to see the gospel promoted out there more and more, especially as our culture has become more and more pagan. Is paganism dangerous? Yeah, it is. Not just with the sacrifice and the glorifying death and so forth. There was an Oregon gunman who lined up his victims and asked specifically which ones were Christian before shooting them execution style. He had an interest in magic and spiritualism and had joined a website called Spiritual Passion, which is a pagan dead website, by the way. Under the category of religious views, here it is a little bit closer, Mercer, that's the name of the shooter here, wrote that he is not religious but is spiritual and was interested in pagan and Wiccan. Mercer also reportedly told his victims, "Oh, you're a Christian? Well, you're about to see God." Think about that for a moment. Here's a guy who says he doesn't believe in God, and he acknowledged God right there. All those who hate me love death. 1 Corinthians 15:26, the last enemy that should be destroyed is death. Death is an enemy. We need to understand that. We've been given a taste of what life is like without God, and that's what death is. That's what the suffering is. Revelation 21:4, we have something to look forward to now. There'll be no more death, suffering, crying, tears, no more pain, for the former things have passed away. So how do we arrive at such a paganized culture? And it's not just in the United States. We see it in Australia and Canada. England is very spiritually dark. When I was over in Wales and some of those areas, it's very difficult. Well, Judges 21:25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Titus 1:15. To the pure, all things are pure. But to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. But even their minds and conscience are defiled. Romans 1, 20 and 21. I'm going to jump down here. Although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful, but they became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Romans 1 continues in verse 28 here. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do things which are not fitting. Backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrusting, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful. The list goes on. 2 Corinthians 4:3-4. But even if our gospel is veiled, it's veiled to those who are perishing, whose minds the God of this age has blinded. Of course, that's a title for Satan. He's not a true God by any means. 2 Timothy 2:25 and 26. In humility, though, correcting those who are in opposition, if God perhaps will grant them repentance, so that they may know the truth, and that they may come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil, having been taken captive by him to do his will. You see, even people who are trapped in paganism can get saved out of it. Even those who are trapped in this belief of loving and worshiping death can be saved from it. But when we look at our culture, what do debased minds do with the knowledge of God? Well, they destroy it. They warp it. They paganize it. I mean, look at what's happened. When it comes to true history, it gets distorted. Moral issues, they distort it. Sin and death, they distort it. Christ, having a proper understanding of Christ and God, they distort him. I mean, look what's happened. When you look at cultures all over the world, we see paganized creator legends. We see paganized creation legends. We see paganized flood legends, paganized Tower of Babel legends. Why would we not expect paganized views of sacrifice? Yeah. Psalm 118:8. It's better to trust in the Lord and put confidence in man. You see, in the Old Testament, they had to deal with paganism. We see this in Leviticus, being warned of people dealing with divination and soothsaying. Give no regard to mediums and familiar spirits. Sadly, people like Saul wanted to go invest in some of this at some point. The Lord was not happy with him. Deuteronomy, they had to say, hey, watch out for those who are practicing witchcraft, soothsaying, or interprets omens, or sorcerers, one who conjures spells, or mediums, or spiritists, or one who calls upon the dead. Nehemiah 13:26. Solomon married all these different wives, many of which are pagan. Nevertheless, the pagan women's here caused him to sin. Yeah. Paganism is dangerous. They had to deal with it in the Old Testament. They had to deal with it in the New Testament. Galatians. Watch out for those involved in idolatry and sorcery. They're not going to inherit the kingdom of God. 1 Corinthians 12:2. You know that when you were led, when you were pagans, you were led astray to mute idols, however you were led. Now, I like this verse though. You know what's great about this verse? Who's being spoken to here? People who used to be pagans and had gotten saved out of it. That's what I love about this. Yeah, the Lord can reach out and save pagans. But let's not forget modern paganism. They dealt with it in the Old Testament. They dealt with it in the New Testament. It's right around us. It's all around us. They just don't use the term very often. But consider the paganization of Christmas. Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas is corrupted into Santa Claus. And they give him godly attributes. He can go everywhere in the whole world. He's the judge of the naughty and the nice list, you see. Paganization of the resurrection. Easter bunnies, really? Come on. Constitution of the United States even points out in the year of our Lord. All four of our organic laws in the United States, that is the Declaration of Independence, the Northwest Ordinance, which is still in effect for our territories, by the way, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution, all one way or another, acknowledge or mention God. And yet here people would say, oh, if you say in the year of our Lord, it's unconstitutional. It's right there in the Constitution. Paganization of the rainbow. We've seen all sorts of terrible things occur in our culture. Paganization, if you fill in the blank, it's all around us. So Christians, how should we get involved in Halloween? What should we do? You know, this is probably the toughest question out of all of them. I've chatted with a lot of pastors and Christian leaders and said, hey, what do you guys do? What are your thoughts? You know, because I value those types of things. Some of the options that I've heard, and I just want to encourage you too, by the way, make sure you consult your local church, but avoid the pagan practices. That's what I would suggest. Or if we could take those practices back, take them back. I don't know, maybe there's ways of doing that. And some people are trying to take Halloween back and do Reformation Day. You know, I've been involved in that myself. And, you know, sometimes just explaining to the kids what sacrifice is when you talk about the gospel to them. Some people are trying to avoid it, but it's tough to avoid it. You can't even go into a grocery shop without seeing something about Halloween. I know we go into our local Kroger and they pass out these little stickers to our kids. And Lacey used to get some of those, you know, little pagan witches and stuff on it. And it's like, oh, thanks. You just gave my kids pagan stuff, you know. So you can't avoid it. It's going to be out there. So, you know, I would suggest make sure we're being discerning about it. Some Christians are offering alternatives. They'll do harvest festivals. Obviously, they'll celebrate Reformation Day. A lot of Christians are doing trunk or treat. Here's what I found out. Kids, they like to dress up. They like to get candy. That's the number one thing. They want the candy. They have fun doing it. They do like to dress up, you know. And I don't mind if kids dress up, you know, into something fun. You know, if somebody wants to dress up like Martin Luther, go for it. You know, dress up like Paul, go for it. You want to dress up like Ray Comfort? I mean, they automatically come in kid sizes. I mean, I love Ray. He's a friend of mine. But yeah, there's different options, you know, where we can be godly in some of those types of things as well. But make sure the kids get the candy. They're more than happy for it. Prayer meetings I've seen people do. There's a lot of different options, but I want to make sure you guys consult with your local church and your local pastors and so forth, and even chat with Don and so on. But make sure in all of this that the gospel is front and center. That's what we need to make sure of. Yes, it's Halloween. Yes, sometimes we think, oh, what do we do? Guys, we got to keep doing what the New Testament has always called us to do, and that's to preach the gospel, get it out there to people. So there's a number of resources I've got on this subject. A little booklet. There's also a DVD on the subject. And yeah, I'm sure you could find some of these online as well. But, you know, we'll run through some of the different aspects on Halloween. But do you guys have any questions about Halloween or anything that you guys wanted to ask that might have triggered into your mind on some of this? Want to grab a drink? Yes, no. If not, what I'll do, I'll pray, and we can be dismissed, and we'll take a break. Are we going to eat first, and then, or what's the schedule from here? Do I do a third one? Okay. Okay, so I can go ahead and do another one. We'll take like a 5-10 minute break here, and then we'll do the next one. Let's do it that way. Let me go ahead and pray, and we'll be dismissed for a little bit. Dear Lord, we just thank you for everything that you've done for us. And I know we've talked about the Tower of Babel and some of the different history in the people groups. And Lord, we've talked about Halloween and paganism and how it's just dominating our culture. And sometimes we don't even realize that it's paganism. Lord, help us be able to discern those issues and just help us stand on your word and get into the Bible just more and more so that we can understand what's going on in the culture and how to counter those things. Lord, help us be able to get the gospel out, whether it's one person at a time, whether it's 1,000 people at a time. Lord, just help us be able to continue to get that gospel and see growth and see people repent of their past ways and the sin that's going on out in our culture. But Lord, we just ask you watch over us, guide us, and bless us, forgive us of our sins, and help us focus on you in all that we do. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, dismissed for a bit. gears on this next one. I've been history heavy and culture heavy on certain things, but now I actually wanted to deal with a little bit more science stuff. So you guys like science? Yeah. Man, I should have gave this talk after lunch or something. No, no, but science versus millions of years, what I wanted to title this one. And, with all my talks, I always like it to come through loud and clear that God and his word are the absolute authority in all areas. And when you hear something that actually goes against scripture or that throws a little nag up there, go, well, I'm not so sure, always go back and check the Bible. The Bible is the supreme authority in all matters. And so when it comes to this idea of millions of years, it really started to just dive and develop in the 1800s. Prior to that, you'd be hard pressed to find hardly anyone that believed in long ages like that. Yeah, you can find some with the ancient Greeks, some of the Epicureans, for example. Some of the Stoics were okay with that sort of thing. Paul argued against them, by the way, the Epicureans and the Stoics. But in today's culture, millions of years is all over the place. It's tough for you to find a book that talks about ancient history that doesn't say something about millions of years. Sadly, even many Christian books want to do that sort of thing. So I want to dive into some of the science. Hopefully we can have fun with it. Here, let's start with some fun. Sally was sure if there had been forbidden vegetables in the Garden of Eden instead of forbidden fruit, Adam and Eve wouldn't have eaten them. There's those mushy peas right there. Did you guys tear into those last night? Some of you guys? Here's another one. Adam, we're going to be the world's first parents. I'm going to have a baby. Eve, a baby? That's great. A baby. Wow, a baby. I wonder what a baby looks like. Adam and Eve. All sorts of fun jokes. All right. Proverbs 18:17. The first one to plead his cause seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him. That's kind of an interesting passage. It's a pretty powerful passage, actually. The point is, it's good to hear both sides before you make a judgment call on something. And, we're in a culture where sometimes people don't do that. In fact, when I grew up and I went through grade schools and I went through high school and college, I was drilled with a secular worldview. They were the first to really just lay down a worldview on top of me. Yeah, I went to church. I went to Sunday school. So I grew up in a moderately Christian home. What I mean by that is, my mom would take us to Sunday school, me and my brothers and sisters. My dad did not really get saved until I was in high school. So it wasn't like he was much of a spiritual leader by any means. He had a very hard life, fought a couple tours in war in Vietnam. He was a Marine. That's how I was raised, by a Marine who was a farmer. Yes, you woke up early in the morning and you did a lot of work until it was dark. So, I mean, that was just the way of life for me. But the point is, I wasn't being taught much of a worldview at home. And when I went to church, and I'll tell you what, I was at church all the time. And when I mean I was at church all the time, I'm not kidding, like all the time, like a good 2 or 3 hours a week. Doesn't sound like much, does it? But by the time you go to Sunday school, you go to church, you might go to youth program one night. And by the time you talk to people and hang out and see what's going on, actual teaching was very, very little. And we have to expect that's what's going on out there with a lot of kids and a lot of even adults that are out there in today's culture. They go to church, they get a little bit of teaching, not a whole lot of in-depth kind of things. And then the world teaches them. Think of kids 40 hours a week being taught secular worldviews, at least in that framework. It's going to happen all the time. The first seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him. And in our culture, we've been drilled with millions of years. There were statistics done. This was done in the book Already Gone. These are actually fascinating statistics. I remember when Britt Beamer was doing this. He died a few years ago now, but he did market research, and the way he did market research for getting statistics for companies and stuff was amazing. And this guy, he nailed it in the way that he would do statistics. And they spent a lot of time, a lot of phone calls to get very accurate statistics. So he was highly sought after by a lot of companies that were out there. But look what he found out. Of kids in their 20s who have walked away from conservative churches, only 20.5% believe the age of the earth was less than 10,000 years. In other words, most of the people who walked away had bought into millions of years. The vast majority of them. Here's a few quotes. About 200 million years ago, over a million years ago, many millions of years ago, for a million years, This was from my 5th grade textbook. I was drilled with it. That just gives you a small idea. I still have that book. I still have things highlighted in there. We're hit with it in school. We're hit with it from our peers. We're hit with it with salt shakers. The dumb luck of this one, millions of years, that salt had been in there, and it's got an expiration date. It was about to expire. I mean, isn't it weird just thinking about that sort of thing? But yeah, we even get it from Christians. This is a Christian that writes this. The moon is younger than the earth. According to Apollo lunar rock samples, it's only 4.25 billion years old compared to the Earth's 4.59 billion years old. Later on in his book, he writes, however, we do know that for the past quarter billion years, this is from Hugh Ross in his book, The Genesis Question. Here was something else that was found out. This was Britt Beamer involved in this research, Ken Hammond, Greg Hall. And the book already compromised. Of the Christian colleges and universities in the United States, only 14.8% of the heads of theology believe in a young earth. When I was over in England, we didn't think there were any that believed in a young earth at their Christian colleges and seminaries. It was shocking. The idea of millions and billions of years permeates our society, and yet it's less than about 200 years old. Really late 17, early 1800s when it was starting to grow. But it was the 1830s with a man named Charles Lyell. That's when the millions of years really started to dominate our culture. And you see, there's a battle in our culture over two different worldviews, God's and not God's. If you start with God, he creates everything in 6 days, rests on the seventh. And of course, in that secular worldview, billions of years ago, goes back to that Big Bang. You see, to remind you, it is a battle over two different worldviews, two kingdoms, some might say, two different worldviews, two different viewpoints, God versus man. So you have two different authorities. Either God is the ultimate authority, or if you reject God, by default, man becomes that authority. And that is the religion of humanism in its broadest sense. I've already kind of talked about this. I'm doing this as a review here. You've got Big Bang, millions of years, and evolution. These are the concepts that are driving that millions of years in our culture. And of course, you have a lot of forms of it. And of course, with some of these Christians that buy into it, they're the ones that are trying to mix two different religions together. When you mix two different religions together, that is called syncretism. That is the fancy philosophical term for it. A lot of people just say it's compromise because something has to get compromised. And so in our culture, a lot of people compromise Genesis with millions of years, but there's a lot of other forms of compromise out there too. I know of a big church that was having a lot of problems that they had bought into allowing people to mix their Christianity with Islam in certain nations. It was very weird the way they were allowing that to happen. It caused a big church split, actually. A lot of people left. There are people who are taking their Christianity and they're mixing it with veganism, or they're mixing it with yoga. Yoga actually comes out of a Hinduistic worldview as part of that. Now, a lot of people think about yoga and they think stretching and that sort of thing. But it's technically, it actually comes out of a different religion. Yes, nothing wrong with stretching and that sort of thing. Just be careful of the terminology and what you're doing with it. So you have to be careful of those forms of syncretism. Exodus 20, verse 11, God made everything in 6 days and we can rest on that. So when it comes to the age of the earth, it is not millions and billions of years old. In fact, if you look at Mark 10, verse 6, I love this. This is one of my favorite passages of Scripture, Mark 10, verse 6. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Let me explain the context of this particular passage. Jesus was asked about divorce, which concerns marriage. And Jesus went back and he quoted from Genesis chapter 1 and 2 in the parallel account of this, which is in Matthew 19. But when he gets here, he's like, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. This is Adam and Eve, that first marriage at the beginning of creation. Now, why is that so powerful? Think of the beginning of creation. If these are normal length days, Adam and Eve are created on the 6th day, you move forward to where Jesus is asked about this, which is about 4,000 years from Adam and Eve to Christ. You look back at this, that's the beginning of creation. But if this really is millions and billions of years, 13 to 15 billion years, and Jesus says, hey, this happened just a few thousand years ago, that's not the beginning of creation at all. It's not even close. In fact, Jesus would be dead wrong. That's the tail end of creation. See, Jesus wasn't quite had it right. And this is powerful. There was one time, I was at a Christian conference. I was manning a booth. It was actually in Cincinnati, down at the big convention center. And I was down there. We got everything set up. I'm like, oh, good. And there's like tons of Christian vendors all over the place, right? So I do what anybody else would do. I got ours set up. I'm going to go walk around and look at the other tables. You know, I'm just walking through. I'm literally just walking through, minding my own business. So you can see what's going to happen, right? There was a guy talking with a few people at his booth, and he saw me. He looked at me, and he goes out around the table, gets right in my face. I was just walking, right? But he saw my tag. Answers in Genesis. He's like, I'm going to have to set you straight on the age of the earth. I mean, it was that loud. Like, all the vendors around, you know, setting up, and those people that were by him stopped. I mean, it was like a pin could drop. I'm just like, Lord, how did I get myself in? I didn't do anything. I was just walking through, right? So this guy's like, you guys just can't get the age of the earth right. I mean, he's just totally loud. And so I remember I used this verse. I went right back and I quoted, I said, so do you think Jesus was wrong in Mark 10:6 when he said that Adam and Eve in that first marriage came at the beginning of creation? Do you think Jesus was lying on that and that it was actually the end of creation like you'd have if it really was millions of years old? I was very nervous when I said that. But he stopped and everybody looked at him for an answer. He's like, well, I don't want to talk about that. I'm like, well, was Jesus wrong? Because if it's millions and billions of years old, Jesus was wrong. He's a sinner, if that's the case in your worldview. I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about that. And I said, it's just scripture here. I'll read it to you. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. This is, if the earth was millions and billions of years old, Jesus would be wrong here. And he literally went behind his booth where those people were. He's like, I don't want to talk about this. I was like, okay, I was really nervous. I just walked off. I didn't know what to do at that point. I was just walking through the convention center. It's hard to believe how there are some people that are so adamant about the millions of years that they will come up to you and get on you about it. I don't think he was mean, you know, like he was going to attack me, but he was very aggressive about it. You see, when it comes to the age of the earth, there is a battle over all this. And it really is permeating our culture. And me, when I was a kid, I was hit hard with that millions of years. In those textbooks that I had, millions of years, but they used examples too. And you guys may have heard of some of these examples. How many of you guys have heard it takes millions of years to form coal or oil, the fossil fuels? We're going to burn them up and we won't get them back for millions of years. We get that all the time. It takes millions of years to make petrified wood, or the Grand Canyon takes millions of years. I hear that all the time. So I'm going to look at some of those things. Millions of years. This idea of millions of years. People look at the Grand Canyon. It takes millions of years to form the Grand Canyon. Here's another view of it. What do you see out there? You see a lot of rock layers, right? Does it really take millions of years to form these rock layers? What happened is people would look at these rock layers, they'd think, wow, these things were laid down slowly and gradually over millions of years. Hold it. Let's go back to the Bible. Let's start with the Bible. Start with the Bible. Let's look at these rock layers. Let's think in terms of the Bible's history. You guys all have the 7 C's of history memorized, right? Good. I don't have to teach you guys anything about the 7 C's of history. Do you know I have the 12 C's of history? We're not going to go there. Just wait. One day. But I actually have a few between confusion and Christ and then one after cross. But covenant and commandments, and captivity and church. Okay, never mind. Well, at any rate, as long as you got the 7 C's, I'm happy with you. But when we think in terms of the 7 C's, you see the rock layers, you automatically think of the flood of Noah's day. Billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. But you see, people were looking at these rock layers a little bit different, late 17, early 1800s. They said, hey, let's look at these rock layers, but let's leave the Bible out of it. As soon as you leave the Bible out of it, you've left God out of it. So man now is that ultimate authority, right? You see that battle over there? So people started looking at these rock layers. They'd say, wow, I wonder how long it would take for these rock layers to form. You can watch them all day. They don't form very fast. So they thought, oh, maybe these rock layers were laid down slowly and gradually over millions and billions of years. In fact, we can follow this trend in history. Buffon estimated the age of the earth at 78,000 years in the late 1700s. People thought he was crazy. Like 78,000 years, nobody can even imagine that. What's wrong with you, man? Abraham Werner, he taught a lot of early geologists, by the way. He said about 1 million years. And then you had a number that just put long ages in there. But here's where it culminates. A man named Charles Lyell. In the 1830s, he wrote 3 books called The Principles of Geology, where he declared these rock layers evidence of slow, gradual accumulations over millions and millions of years. In other words, he said, God got it wrong. There was no global flood. So his views permeated and started to dominate cultures, started to dominate academia. He heavily influenced Charles Darwin, by the way. This was somebody that Charles Darwin really looked up to. Lord Kelvin adjusted it and became a little more specific. He said anywhere from 20 to 100 million years based on cooling rates of the Earth. Remember, they assumed that the Earth was molten and it had to cool off. So based on a couple of cooling rates, he got anywhere from 20 to 100 million years. Arthur Holmes was the first one to use radiometric dating in 1913. He estimated the age of the Earth at 1.6 billion years using a radiometric dating method that only gives billions of years. Go figure that one out. Claire Patterson, 1956. He's the first one to declare the age of the Earth 4.5 billion years. You know how he did it? He, again, used a radiometric dating method that only gives billions of years, and he looked at a group of meteorites that didn't even come from the Earth and declared the age of the Earth 4.5 billion years. Did you know that's where the age of the Earth comes from? Something that's not from Earth? But see, in their religious viewpoint, they thought that the whole solar system was formed from a nebular hypothesis. And so all that stuff was formed at the same time. And so if we look at the stuff that's out in space, that'll give us a better idea of how old the Earth is, because stuff here on Earth, they can mess everything up. So that's where they got the idea. But I guess they forgot that, you know, meteorites come zipping through the atmosphere at massive temperatures, which change all sorts of things. Well, that's where the age comes from. So nobody believed the age of the Earth 4.5 billion years until 1956, less than 100 years ago. Well, wait. Yes, something like that. So, how old is the Grand Canyon then? You see, we have a battle over two different worldviews. We have some people starting with man's ideas, saying slow, gradual. We start with the Bible. It was a matter of thousands of years ago in the flood. Was it a lot of water and a little bit of time, or was it a lot of time and a little bit of water? You see, people are battling over this. And if we start with the Bible, it's the Bible that makes the most sense of this, because God's the one that's always right. You see? So in light of that, we should automatically question when somebody says it takes millions of years to form rock layers. We need to automatically question that in our worldview. They're out there using something like, let me explain this for just a moment. Because you may have seen something like this, geologic timescale. There's fancy versions of it. The United States Geological Survey has a really fancy one. There's kids' versions and all this. Creationists and evolutionists actually agree on something. Let me explain that for a moment. We agree these really are real rock layers. There really is a Cambrian rock layer. There really is a Permian rock layer, Cretaceous rock layer. Where we disagree is the timing about how long it took to lay down that rock layer. In the secular world, they say it took 100 million years of slow, gradual changes to lay down that rock. Or they say it took 72 million years to lay down the Cretaceous rock, and they say that ended about 65 million years ago, or 68 or so, 66, some of them put. But the point is, they're real rock layers. We're looking at the same rock layers thinking, boom, over the course of about a year. Okay? Same rock layers, same flood sediment. They're just trying to stretch it out to be millions and billions of years. Okay? So when you hear somebody say, but it takes millions of years to form rock layers, doesn't it? Automatically, your mind should go, hold on a second, red flag, let me think about this. Let's start with the Bible. No, it doesn't. But let's look at it scientifically now. Mount St. Helens. You guys been to Mount St. Helens, right? Yeah, blew its top in 1980. 1982 went off again. In 1980, I lived in Illinois, and I remember the ash cloud going over. It looked like just like white clouds is really what it looked like, just like a big haze. So I remember it actually going over. But you see the lava dome in here. This actually rose up and solidified in 1986. Just so you know, when it comes to radiometric dating methods and stuff, when something cools and solidifies, that's supposed to start the radiometric dating clock. That's what they say anyway. But at any rate, when Mount St. Helens blew its top, boom, laid down massive amounts of rock layers. Just this little segment right here was laid down over the course of about 3 hours on June 12th, about 25 feet thick. And if you look closely, some of these rock layers are very fine. If you had no idea that a catastrophe did this, and you came up years later and you're looking at this, you'd say, look at all these annual layers. Yet it all occurred in minutes, really. Hours, I guess. But we can also do experiments in laboratory, laminae and water and in air. You can both get them to settle out in their layers. And with the right chemical structure, you can form that into rock. Take a look at this one. This is out in the Grand Canyon. I actually had a chance to float down the Grand Canyon, but I never got a chance to see this one. So this is another friend of mine's photo. But you can see this. This goes like this, kinks, bends, turns, and goes up at almost a 90-degree angle. Who's the strongest one in here? There's usually like a 7-year-old kid in my audience. Yeah, I am. Yeah, okay. Well, I'll have David. David will be the strongest one. What happens if you bend rock? It breaks. Did you know geologists have walked all along this and have studied this, all up and down this? It doesn't break. It doesn't break. How amazing is that? So, I mean, yeah, here on the very surface out here, but the actual layer never breaks. So what that means is it was soft sediment when it was laid down, and then it was kinked and bent into place, then it solidified into rock. Wow, that makes sense of the flood. Now, don't get confused. See the people down here? This is huge. Big area there. We see a lot of stuff like this out at the Grand Canyon. So here's one called Monument Fold. It makes a Z shape. And I took this picture. We're actually floating down. I'm like, I'm like, they're like, yeah, that's a famous one. I'm like, well, why didn't we stop? But we just kept going. There's so much to see in the Grand Canyon. It's amazing. But a neat little shape there. I've seen some of this out in the Appalachian. Tower Babel. That's good. So you see this thrust here, where it kind of came up. This rock, I was driving along, I actually turned around and went back and took a picture of it. It's like straight, up, down, straight. I was like, whoa, I got to get a picture of this bit rock layer. So yeah, it doesn't take millions of years. It just takes the right conditions. And that's the key. The flood makes amazing conditions of this because it lays down everything and then it kinks and bends it. And, when we're in the different Appalachian mountains and so forth, sometimes you see them like this and it's sheared off. It's amazing. But that makes sense of the flood. Psalm 104, verse 8 and 9. Mountains rose and the valley sank down to the place which you established for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass over, so that they will not return to cover the earth. When was it that God made the promise that the waters would not return to cover the earth? Into the flood, exactly. So this is relating back to that. In fact, if you understand Psalm 104, it starts off with creation, transitions to the flood, then it transitions post-flood. And so you can see this portion here during the flood. Something else we see polystrate fossils. Trees are one of the main ones that really shoot through multiple layers. This is the famous one called Rock of Ages. Here's one. I got creationists there. And you can see where this one went on up. Pieces of it have fallen out. Are we to believe that a tree sat there and waited for several 100,000 years to get covered up to turn that into a fossil? No, of course not. So you see that. But that's a young John Baumgartner there. He's getting up there now. What about canyons? Does it take millions of years to form canyons? I was drilled with this. Mount St. Helens solved that one, didn't it? Yeah, when it went off that second time in particular, it formed a new drainage basin on the Toutle River here. And this was all cut in one day on March 19, 1982. Hurricane speed mud flow. Boy, just zipped right through there. This is 1/40th the scale size of the Grand Canyon. Even have side canyons very similar to what you see in the Grand Canyon. Just like that. Didn't take millions of years. Here's another one, Canyon Lake Spillway. This was the Guadalupe River down in Texas. Back in 2002, due to immense flooding, they had so much water, they had to release it out of the dam. And so, boom, I mean, it was going over the dam anyway, but they released it out of the dam. It comes shooting down through here. And you can see what it did. It just tore through things. There's a person for scale. Boom. Took out a road. That didn't take millions of years. Just took the right conditions. Flowing water can do all sorts. Imagine the flowing water coming, as the mountains are rising, the valley sinking down after the flood. So, it doesn't take millions of years. There's a lot of examples of canyons, actually, that could have been thrown up here. Does it take millions of years to form rock? I was actually in a lecture once where, somebody's like, asked, does it take millions of years to form rock, and it takes millions of years to form rock. No, actually it doesn't. Here's some examples. Here's a clock on a rock. That didn't take millions of years. It just took the right conditions, you see. Here's a fossilized hat. That hat's turned into solid rock. It was left in spray mine for about 50 years. That's the original hard hat, by the way. The Yorkshire Bears. This is a famous place over in England, actually, not too far from Yorkshire. If you go out there, there's a place where the water it's full of limestone. And so people would go out, and they've been doing this for hundreds of years. People would go out and hang things on it, and they'd come back a couple of months later and get their item, and it's solid rock. Teddy bears are one of the things that people do. You can see a hat with all sorts of things people have turned into fossils. So it doesn't take millions of years. Again, just the right conditions. Here's a spark plug encased in rock. That spark plug's from the 1950s, so that didn't take millions of years. Just the right conditions. Where I was at, I grew up in Western Illinois, and we didn't have much for caves in Illinois, but you go right across the river to Missouri, tons of caves. They were awesome. In fact, there was a youth group trip that me and some buddies we all went on, and we floated down the Merrimack River. And when we floated down the Merrimack River, we just kind of had ourselves, they just let us go. We're going to make it down to the campsite. And so me and my buddies, one of them was my cousin, another was a buddy. We'd stop at all these caves, right? They're all along there. And we'd go into these caves. We'd go way back. And I mean, we were having a heyday. We had to scale this cliff once to go into one. And then there was this one where we could take the canoe and we just went right into it. And then we went up in it. And we made a mistake because, we've been going to all these different caves, and our batteries for our flashlight were pretty much dead and waterlogged. And so we get in there and we're like, we find land, and it's very dark. You can see the entrance to the cave like way back there. And we stop the canoe, and we're just up in there, and it's like crunch, crunch, crunch. We're like, what in the world? He's like, oh, I got some waterproof matches. So he lit this thing. There was about 16,000 snakes, 40,000 spiders. They're everywhere. We're in shorts, right? We're in shorts. That's about it. I think one of us might have had flip-flops. I was like, that's what we're crunching. And there's spiders on you. We're like, ah! Of course, the light goes out. We're going for the water. We're trying to get the canoe out. We're going. My one buddy, he's not fast. We're like, get out of the way. Go. We get out there. We didn't go in any more caves after that. But we went on this tour at Merrimack Caverns, which is beautiful cave, by the way. And we asked the guide, we're like, yeah, we went in this cave. And there's like 16,000 snakes, spiders, there's all this stuff. And they're like, you went in a warm cave. Don't ever go in a warm cave. No. Okay. Don't ever go in a warm cave. If they're like 50 degrees, you're good. It was a warm cave. And warm caves, all the animals love that. And of course, the snakes and spiders go in there and devour everything and just breed like crazy. And man, I was scared of caves after that. Well, at any rate, we go in all these different caves, and they would talk about stalactites, stalagmites, the little straws and all sorts of stuff. And they would talk about how these are millions of years old. It takes millions of years for these sorts of things to form. And just so you know, stalactites are the one on top. They hold on tight. Stalagmites are the ones at the bottom. If they grow together into a column, scientists call that a column. Not a creative lot. The great red spot on Jupiter, they call the great red spot. Yeah, scientists. Well, at any rate, do stalactites really take a long time to form? No. But some people teach that. I mean, we see this in hosts of different websites, secular websites. This is an extremely slow process. This is a stalactite, requires millions of years to form. Really? Jerry Trout, he's an expert cave specialist with the Forest Service, says that through photo monitoring, he's watched a stalactite grow several inches in a matter of days. Here's a bottle. I think both of them were bottles, but this one here, you can still see the shape of the bottle. This was down in Jenolan Caves. And the bottle was left there in the 1950s. They've already turned into a stalagmite. But I mean, we see a lot of examples. This was a good one. Oh, I love this. This was at Cosmic Caverns. My family and I, this was in northern Arkansas. And we were down there, and we were there maybe 2012. So it's about a year after there was this big rainstorm. So we're walking down the path, right? And our guide says, oh, here, look out for this big stalagmite, right? It's like, it's huge, right? So we have to kind of walk around it and keep going. And just in passing, like, yeah, that one formed last year in a big rainstorm, and just like in Stride, millions of years. I'm like, hold it. Did you say that one formed last year in a rainstorm? Yeah, it was a big rainstorm, and everything in the cave opened up and everything was growing really fast. And you get this huge stalagmite here. And it's like, can I get a picture of that? Because it doesn't take millions of years. The key for a cave is to understand, is it an active cave or is it an inactive cave? If it is an active cave, that means that water and minerals still flowing through it. Things are growing fast. An inactive cave, you go over here, the water isn't going through it anymore. The water tables move below it. So things were growing, now it's not. And so people look at that and they say, well, it's not growing, so it takes millions of years. Well, as soon as there's a rainstorm, it grows. You see, so the key is it an active cave or is it an inactive cave? But it doesn't take millions of years because this stuff can happen quickly. Emil Silvestru, he's a cave specialist, actually. He's originally from Romania, but he's been living in Canada, and he's had a lot of health struggles here recently. But in the Crickville Creek gold mine in Colorado, stalagmites and stalactites over a meter long have grown in less than 100 years. So it doesn't take millions of years at all. What about precious gems? You know, when I worked on titanium diboride many years ago at the university, I was in a lab. I could theoretically have made all sorts of precious gems in my lab. I look back thinking, why didn't I? What's going on? I was being a good student, right? But, you know, we're taught over and over again, it takes millions of years to form things like diamond. In fact, sometimes they say that diamonds are billions of years old. Physics.org here, you know, they'll say, boss, between 1 and 2 billion years old, it takes millions of years for these things to form. But do you realize there's companies that just manufacture diamonds? Apollo Diamond or Jamesis, for example. Yeah, they make them. I'm going to jump down here. They're real. They meet every measure of being a diamond from a aesthetic point of view, from a scientific point of view. They're diamonds. So therefore, they have all the properties of diamonds. And many of you have probably grown up with lab-made diamonds. It doesn't take millions of years. So you can do it quickly. And there's actually 3 different ways you can make a diamond or some of these other gemstones. Chemical vapor deposition, heat and pressure, or just massive pressure itself. Here's diamonds in minutes. The ability to make diamonds at room temperature in a matter of minutes. That's all it takes. Particular type of diamond. Oh, and if you really want to get tricky, look at this. Swiss company takes cremated human remains and under high heat and pressure that mimic conditions deep within the earth, compress them into diamonds. Each year, the remains of 800 to 900 people enter the facility. About 3 months later, they exit as diamonds to be kept in a box or turned into jewelry. This is why I suggest young men buy real natural diamonds and not get one at a pawn shop. Oh my goodness. I got grandma on my finger. This is terrible. Who thought of this? What's wrong with their sick minds? Apparently they do that a lot with pets nowadays. Here's a gemologist. They say, like most precious gemstones, opals take millions of years to form. Over millions of years, these silica layers accumulate, forming beautiful polychromatic opal deposits for lucky miners to discover. But no, you can make opals quickly. In fact, it was a Christian man that discovered this, Lynn Cram, down in Australia. He discovered the secret that's enabled him to actually grow opals in glass jars stored in his wooden shed laboratory, and the process takes only a matter of weeks. Weeks, that's all it takes. Yeah, all sorts of laboratory-made gems can be made. And when volcanoes tend to go off, they tend to make gemstones quickly. So when a big volcano goes off, like out at Mount St. Helens, people would rush out there trying to find certain gemstones because of the heat and pressure that would form them quickly. And this is actually from the Mount St. Helens gift shop website. Other gems commonly associated with volcanic origin include emerald, diamond, garnet, peridot, and topaz. What about coal? Man, we had a lot of coal mines back where I was from, and they would bring these video cassettes in. Oh boy, videos in the old days, and they would show these videos of how coal took millions of years to form, and it was sponsored by the local coal mines. And they would bring it in, and they would talk about all this coal and how it's a fossil fuel and take millions of years to form coal. And we used to have a few wood stoves in our house. One of them was actually designed to be a coal burner. We could burn wood in it. But we go get coal once in a while from a coal mine. We burn some coal in there. California Energy Commission says there are 3 major forms of fossil fuels: coal, oil, and natural gas. All 3 were formed many hundreds of millions of years ago, before the time of the dinosaurs, hence the name fossil fuels. California Energy Commission goes on to say, more and more rock piled on top of more and more rock, and it weighed more and more. It began to press down on the peat. The peat was squeezed and squeezed until the water came out of it, and eventually, over millions of years, it turned to coal, oil, or petroleum and natural gas. Really? All right. When Mount St. Helens went off, it actually formed those coal seams. It didn't actually make the coal, though. It made the alternating spaces for it here. Dr. Gary Parker and his wife Mary, in just minutes and months, Mount St. Helens and Spirit Lake produced a coal-like sediment pattern once thought to take millions of years just to form. So the pattern itself can be made quickly. But in laboratories, it's actually really easy. Wood, water, and acidic clay at only 150 degrees centigrade which isn't real hot, anywhere from 4 to 36 weeks, forms black coal. It's actually quite easy. Wood, water, and acidic clay. What about oil? Does it take millions of years? This is the big one. They're always debating over oil. Millions and billions of years. Oil, we have some oil back where I was from. These were actually taken in the county that I was at. And this is part of the flat part of the county. I was in a part of Illinois. Like one part of it's like flat as a pancake. And then you go down to where I live and it's like hills and hollers. It's really neat. There's a few places you could stand this way and you look out and everything's flat. You turn around this way and nothing is flat. It's kind of neat to think, wow, I'm standing in the same spot. Live Science website. Nature has been transmuting dead life into black gold for millions of years using little more than heat, pressure, and time, scientists tell us. Wikipedia. Look what they say. However, fossil fuels are generally considered to be non-renewable sources because they can take millions of years to form. Really? All right, well, let's take a look at this. Sewage sludge. A $22.4 million tender has been approved in Western Australia for the world's first plant to make oil from sewage sludge. The sludge is heated without oxygen to 450 degrees centigrade in one reactor. Then in a second reactor, the resultant vapors are allowed to contact the char residue from the first. Boom, there you go. That'll make you think twice when you flush the toilet, won't it? Animal waste is used to make oil. Turkey and pig slaughterhouse waste are daily trucked into the world's first biorefinery, a thermal conversion processing plant in Carthage, Missouri. On peak production day, 500 barrels of high-quality fuel oil, better than crude oil, are made from 270 tons of turkey guts and 20 tons of pig fat. Okay. You can make oil from brown coal. It only takes 2 to 5 days there. You can do that. Here's the big one, though. You can take oil and turn it into algae. Pacific Northwest National Laboratory showed that you can do this in only 60 minutes. Oh, and then they perfected it. Now they can do it in 30 minutes, even cheaper. People can theoretically manufacture oil very well. And yet we're still taught it's a fossil fuel, millions of years old and so forth. Now, granted, there's plenty of reserves and so forth out there that people are digging for. What about petrified wood? Live Science website. Over millions of years, these minerals crystallize within the wood's cellular structure, forming the stone-like material known as petrified wood. Well, not really. They can do it in about 2 hours at 1400 degrees centigrade. Presto, instant petrified wood. Now you might think, okay, 1400 degrees C, that's high. That is hot, I will say that. But here's what a lot of people don't tell you. Most of the petrified wood we find is found associated with volcanic rock layers, where it does get that hot, which is quite interesting. They've also found another way to do it at only 112 degrees Fahrenheit, that is. Surprisingly simple, the process involves soaking wood in a solution containing silicon and aluminum compounds at low temperatures here. So you can go to your local home store, Lowe's, Home Depot, Ace, wherever you want to go, and you can order in yourself some petrified wood flooring. That's how cheap they can make it nowadays. So, oh, does it take millions of years to form mountains? No, really, it just took the flood. So we already know that, right? But we actually have some examples of some mountains being built relatively quickly. This is obviously a volcanic one, Paracutin. 1943 to 1952. It was actually a guy out in his cornfield. I think it was a cornfield, some sort of a field. There's this vent that starts coming up. He's trying to block it. Next thing you know, it turns into a huge volcano. And, well, there went your field. But there it is. Didn't take millions of years. Just it took a few years, because it was a slow build. But I remember reading about that when I was a kid even. What about millions of years to form islands? No. Earthquake Island is a good example. Earth performed the ultimate magic trick last week, making an island appear out of nowhere. The new island is a remarkable side effect of the deadly September 24th earthquake in Pakistan that killed more than 500 people. So you have an earthquake that causes a lot of problems on land, but what it does underneath is it pushed up an island over here. And so they get this island, and here's a picture of it here on this side. Of course, you got another one over here at the Canary Islands. So you got a couple of them there. There's a famous one called Surtsey in Iceland. And this one fascinated everybody. It actually occurred in the 1960s. And if you saw this island today, you'd think it was just as old as any other island, because it's got trees, it's got animals, it's got a whole ecosystem on it. And people were just shocked at how quick that showed up because people were out there planting trees. It got the seeds and animals and all sorts of stuff just all on its own. There was one in Japan as well that formed quickly in 2013. Here's a new island off of Yemen. Here's a pre-photo from NASA. Then all of a sudden it all smokes up. Next thing you know, you have an island there. Okay. Does it take millions of years to form fossils? This is the big one. Man, I got this one all the time. Yeah, but what about fossils? It takes millions of years to form fossils. I was drilled with that one more than you could ever imagine. Take a look at this quote here. Charles Darwin and evolution. How do we know? Basically, they're arguing why it's true. Oh, by the way, this is Christ College. I know. Fossils are the remains of animals and plants which died and were buried. Over millions of years, they can be turned to rock. Well, I did an experiment out on this place I was living one time. There was a cow bone. And over the years, it just sat there and decayed and rotted. Never turned into a fossil. In fact, you look at the bottom of ponds or lakes, you don't see fossils forming down there. At the bottom of the ocean, you don't see them. To form a fossil, you have to have rapid burial by sediment-rich water to seal out the oxygen. You have to have sufficient water to be able to replace the bony material into something like limestone, some sort of a rock material. And yet, here's what we're taught. Out in secular textbooks and stuff, they teach things like this. A fish dies, falls to the bottom, slowly gets covered up by sediment. Millions of years later, you get a fossil. And here's examples of it. Here's one from a kid's book. See how you got the fish that falls to the bottom. Look at this, over a long period of time. And of course, in the context of millions of years. Here's one with a dinosaur. Dinosaur falls to the bottom, gets weighted down. Millions of years later, you get yourself a dinosaur fossil. But what really happens? Fish die, float. Not all fish float when they die. They rot, they decay, they get scavenged, things eat it. Next thing you know, there's no parts of it left. Right? It doesn't form into a fossil. How do you form a fossil? Let's say you're a happy fish. Swimming along, happy fish, having a good old time. Springs of the great deep burst forth, and water and dirt and sediment get all mixed up, and here it comes, and bah! Not a happy fish anymore. Boom. You get rapidly buried, sediment-rich water seals out that oxygen. Boom. You can get converted to a fossil. Now stop for just a moment. You have all these fossils, right? They're getting replaced with material like limestone to turn it into a rock. Where did all the biological material go? The water takes it out, pools it down into crude oil. See how it all forms? It all works together. Genesis 6, verse 13, God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth." It's not just the water. Water and earth mix up, you get mud and sediment and all sorts of stuff. We see a lot of examples of rapid fossils. Here's an ichthyosaur. It's a marine reptile. Look at this. It's in the process of giving birth. That's how fast it was ready. That fish over there didn't get a chance to finish its dinner. This fish over here got a chance to finish its dinner, but not digest it. Look at that, just swallowed it. Turtles, clams. This is my hand. I mean, some of these clams are gigantic. This is, I want you to understand, this is over 2 miles high. It's actually probably about closer to 2.5 miles high down the Andes Mountains. This is tops of mountains. You're seeing all these little marine creatures. Just amazing. Closed. Notice how they're closed shells. What happens to shells when they're done? They open up. Right, you walk along the beach, we get them there, get all cleaned out and stuff. No, these are closed. They're still trying to grow. That's how rapidly these things are buried and fossilized. Here's a horseshoe crab, and you can see its tracks. Walking, stop dead in its tracks. If you zoom up, you can see these tracks a little better right behind it. Wow. But look at this. Scientists have developed a method that can make a fossil in 24 hours. 24 hours, all it takes. I've gotten a chance to see some of those. Pretty amazing. 24 hours. They did one with a jellyfish just to show. Man, they can even take soft material and make it in 24 hours. Here's a big one that I get. If you want your mind to get blown. Distant star light. You guys heard this one? Mm-hmm. I actually like answering this question. This one to me is a fun question to answer. But typically, here's the way it goes. The stars are billions of light years away. Then how did their light get here in about 6,000 years? Let's start off. You go back to the Bible. God created the sun, moon, and the stars to give light on the earth, and it was so. Is that too hard for God? No. So I want you to understand it's not a problem from a Christian viewpoint. It only looks like a problem when people are trying to think naturalistically, no God, no power, nothing like that in creation. So they want to look at this and they want to go, okay, there's a distant star. Here's this light trying to get here. It's billions of light years away. How do you get it here in only about 6,000 years? First thing you need to understand is a light year is not a measurement of time. It is a measurement of distance. Correct. It's kind of like a mile. Well, longer than a mile, obviously. But it's a measurement of distance. Genesis 1, verse 15. Let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens, to give light on the earth. And it was so. That's not a problem. But when people ask this question, this is what goes on in my head. Haha, you guys have a distant starlight problem. Do you realize the secular world has the exact same problem? They don't tell you that, but they have the exact same problem. It's called the horizon problem in physics. So in their view, you have different matter showing up at different parts in the universe. And as it does, you have distant starlight coming out as things are expanding. So this light is supposed to expand and hit other points. In other words, if there's light coming out of point A and point B where matter is coming into existence, then it's supposed to look like this. The problem is, over the age that they've got for the universe, the light wouldn't interchange. So why are we seeing it in the first place? You see, it's a big problem in their view. It's called the horizon problem. It's a big problem in the secular worldview. In fact, there's a lot of problems with the Big Bang expansion and the Big Bang models anyway. In fact, there's multiple Big Bang models. There's a closed model spherical, an open model flat, open model saddle shape. So sometimes when people want to come up to me and say, hey, they believe in the Big Bang, I'm going to ask them, well, which model of Big Bang do you believe in? Why are the others wrong? Most of them probably don't even know that. So there are some issues there. But Big Bang has some bigger problems. Massive number of scientists, even in the secular world, are saying, we don't agree with it, it doesn't work. Particularly its model of inflation. So they've been re-questioning it, trying to say, hey, what can we do? They actually have big problems with it. In a paper published in the New Scientist in 2012, two experts on inflation, which is vital to Big Bang. I know I don't want to scare you guys with all the science, but they thought inflation predicted a smooth, flat universe. Instead, it predicts every possibility an infinite number of times we're back to square one. Inflation has destroyed itself. It logically self-destructs. Now, I don't know if you realize this, but that just destroyed all of Big Bang right there. It's gone. And they're saying, what they went on to say in the paper is, does anyone have any ideas? What do we try to do? Do we try to fix it? Do we try to fix inflation? Do we have to try to invent a new type of Big Bang model? Maybe no boundary banks? Anybody have any ideas? That's really what they said. And as a result, there was this big cosmology statement. Massive number of secular scientists, physicists, astronomers, and astrophysicists are signing this saying, we no longer believe Big Bang. That's a big thing going on out there. So yeah, they have big problems. Now, here's the thing. We actually have a number of models that can solve this. There's speed of light decay, which most people backed off of. That's called CDK. There's a couple of relativistic models. Humphrey's actually backed off of his, but I think he's kind of re-looking at it a little bit. There's cosmological time zones. That's called the alternate synchrony convention by Dr. Jason Lisle. That's actually my favorite model. Let me try to put it in simple terms. Okay, let's say I'm on an airplane, right? And I'm going to fly from New York to LA. And I hop on at 4 o'clock. I fly. And I arrive in LA at 4 o'clock. All right, well, you might think, yeah, but your flight still took you hours and hours to get there, right? Now, let me explain a property of light. When light goes the speed of light, what happens to time, according to Einstein? Time goes to 0. So let's say you're billions of light years away. We're going to ride on top of a light beam, leaving that star and arriving at Earth, billions of light years away. How long was our trip? Instantaneous. Time went to 0. So what this does is it plays off of how are you looking at the light. And so it's pretty powerful. There's a lot more to it. Carmelian physics actually is something similar to the cosmological time zones. It works different with the Carmelian physics, but some of the conceptual stuff behind it's very similar. There was another one at the International Conference of Creation that played off of some of this as well. Dr. Danny Faulkner has the Dasha solutions, and it solves it for Creation Week, but not after Creation Week. The point is, there are models that look at this and can solve this sort of an issue. So I actually like looking at this one because we actually don't have a big problem. And what I love is the secular world is just now starting to borrow some of our models. So we're actually light years ahead of them in the research. But the problem is it's not a problem. See, they think it's a problem, but it really isn't when we look at it. All right, tree rings and long ages. We're getting close here to the end. These are some of the ones that were brought up in the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate. You guys familiar with that debate? I was actually there. I was at the debate, and I went up to Bill Nye right afterwards, and I asked him to sign a Bible, and he signed it real big. He's like, Bill Nye, the science guy, question everything with a big arrow to the contents of the Bible. So I had Bill Nye's written permission to question everything he said in the debate. And so I wrote a book on it, Inside the Nye Ham Debate, and Ken Ham and I both co-published that one. But Bill Nye and I actually share the same degree. We're both mechanical engineers, but I'm one level higher than him. So I actually went through everything. I wasn't limited in the debate by time, so I could go into his arguments, and I could talk about it, and I could refute it. And it's a pretty powerful book when you go into it. But tree rings, ice cores were another thing that they debated in there as well. Well, let's look at tree rings. The way they try to do this is they try to say these are each annual rings. If it's a bigger ring, you got more growth. If it's a smaller ring, you got less growth that year. And so they have those as annual rings and so forth. And they try to match up different pieces of wood that they find in different graves going back in the past, trying to match up. Oh, these match. Oh, these match, and so forth. All right, well, does it really work? Does it really work to do that? All right, let's look a little closer. Here's two pieces of wood, okay? And you can see this one here has a lot of growth. That one there doesn't have so much growth. Do you think those would match up just by looking at them? If you found those two, you'd say, not a chance. Those are actually from the same tree. We can't get them to match up on the same tree at the same level. And we're sitting there assuming that these different pieces of wood match up in places all over the place. The other thing you need to understand is when you start looking at different tree rings are growth rings, not necessarily yearly rings. If you have a little bit of a spell in there where things are not, you're not getting any rain, simulating like a 2-week drought, it's going to stop growing and it'll grow a new ring. So it's not necessarily a yearly ring. But if you just look at some of those, I mean, if you were to compare that segment to this segment, they don't match up at all. Bristlecone pines, these are the ones that they claim are the oldest ones in the world. They say they got some of these that have 6,800 years old based on their rings that are in there. But, you know, scientists have been able to go in there and check. You put a little drought in there. That, in fact, is they live in drought areas. All you have to do is just simulate a little miniature drought. Boom, it grows another ring. You can grow a whole bunch of rings in 1 year. Because it's a growth ring, not a yearly ring. See, that's the problem that they're doing. Wet, dry cycles, that's all it takes. Ice cores. Oh boy, I can't believe they actually used this one in the debate. Ken was all over him on this one though. But I've actually witnessed in some of the storms that we've had, and you guys could probably see it out here, in one storm, there was a time where we had snow, then we had an ice, then it went back to snow, then it went back to ice, and you went out there and it kind of compacted, and you can see a whole bunch of layers, and it's like, that all happened in like 2 hours. You see, as that gets compacted down. What these are phases within a storm, or it could be the same storm. It doesn't mean, oh, wow, we had one little layer for the whole year. Do you guys really think when you look out here at all this snow that that's just from 1 year? You know, in the sense of just from one storm, that's going to produce one layer if it gets compacted down? No, of course it's not. You guys have had all sorts of snowstorms. You've had all sorts of layers that have hit out here. So that's what it is. It's phases and multiple storms. Dr. Larry Vardaman, he was at the Institute for Creation Research, looking at some of the World War II planes. There was one that landed in Greenland, and they knew right where it landed, and over 50 years, it was underneath 250 feet of ice layers. Not 250 layers, 250 feet of layers. If they had no idea, they'd be like, man, that's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years old, maybe even millions of years old. You know, based on that. You see, so they're getting their interpretation just dead wrong on some of this. Proverbs 18:17. The first one that pleads his case seems right till his neighbor comes and examines him. I was drilled with the secular worldview over and over again. And when I finally got a chance to hear the other side, it's like, oh my, this makes a lot more sense. Colossians 2:8. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not on Christ. You see, friends, we need to hear the whole matter, and then we make a judgment call on that. So what is the conclusion of the matter? No experiments have ever been run over the course of millions of years. None, not one. To say that a process took millions of years is simple imagination. There's never been an experiment run over the course of millions of years that verify that any of this stuff takes millions of years to form. And yet we have examples over and over again where it doesn't. So when it comes to the issue of science, science is not on the side of the secular worldview. It's just not. Now, here's a question. Does belief in millions of years hold back research and technology? Do you realize that for 100, 150 years, people thought it took millions of years to form coal and oil? Do you think if people 100 years ago would have realized, wow, we can manufacture oil, that they would have things in place and set up that could have made this a lot easier? Yeah, they probably could have. You see? It does hold back scientific methodology. It holds back scientific advances, especially in industrial design. Look at the billions of dollars that have been spent on evolutionary stories over the years instead of doing actual science and actual process. Yeah, get you thinking, won't it? I have a book called Flood of Evidence. And in this book, I outline the whole section in there about, you know, does it take millions of years to form coal or oil or rock layers or so forth. But that's a pretty powerful book. If you guys want to know more about that, there's a section in this book that really deals with that. And you can find the references to all this. But I think I'm done for the day. So I'm going to go ahead and pray. I think we're going to go eat lunch. Oh, man, I'm 5 minutes over. You guys are probably hungry. That's fine. Let me go ahead and pray, and we'll be dismissed. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for being such an incredible Lord. Lord, thank you for giving us your word, to give us a guidebook, to understand things, whether it's passages in the Old Testament or New Testament, how we can live our lives, how we interact with others, how we can look at science or history or different holidays and so forth. Lord, thank you for giving us your absolute word. Lord, help us be honorable with your word and be discerning with it. Lord, I just want to pray for all the students that are here, and Lord, just bless them and strengthen them. I know sometimes going through some of these talks, it's like drinking from a fire hose. But Lord, I just pray that they're able to retain some of this information and just grow with it and use it. Use it when they're witnessing to others, Lord, particularly when they're reaching out to and talking to people about the gospel, if they're struggling with millions of years or some of these different issues. Lord, I just pray that this stuff pops into their mind and they can give a gentle answer to help respond to some of these things, to help break down those walls so people will be more open to the gospel. Lord, we thank you. We praise you. We just hope that you receive the honor and the glory in all this. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Thank you, guys. All right.